Hello, friends. Welcome to the Barn Burner Flames Nation Draft Primer. We have a great cast of people smarter than me and draft experts and smart hockey minds as we're going to explore what should be an incredible opening day of the draft, June 28th, a Friday at the Sphere in Las Vegas. For Flames fans, it feels like one of the biggest days in franchise history since that summer with a lot of days in franchise history. Welcome to the program. My name is Ryan Pinder. I want to welcome our outstanding panel. There's Ryan Pike, the managing editor of FlamesNation.ca. We've also brought in two draft experts. Not that Pike isn't an expert, but specific draft experts. We've got Derek Neumeier of McKeen's Hockey. He's their assistant director of scouting, as well as the head Western scout. And Byron Bader of hockeyprospecting.com is back for another year, sir. We had fun on the mock draft last year. He's the creator of hockeyprospecting.com. Fellas, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, love it.
These are the guys that I read to make myself sound smart about the draft. So it should be fun.
You're the three I'm going to regurgitate until the 28th. So people think I'm smart. You see the trickle-down effect, the power you men have?
Yeah, I love it.
Try not to abuse it.
Scheme.
So we're going to start the program by talking specifically about the Calgary Flames. Now, you're both Calgarians, which is convenient. That doesn't mean you necessarily have rooting interests. Maybe it does, but I don't think the situation the Calgary Flames are in will catch either of you by surprise. Pike's going to walk us through some org charts, and we'll take a look at exactly what's going on with the Calgary Flames, because I don't know if you guys remember, way back when there was a Battle of Alberta in the playoffs. It was way back in 2022. There's 5 skaters left from that team, and one of them is Andrew Mangiapane, whose contract's up at the year, and the other is Oliver Shillington, who doesn't have a contract yet. If people are wondering if this is a rebuild or a retool or a whatever, pick your own word. Nobody's left from 2 years ago, Ryan. It's crazy.
It's the term I like to use is strategic retreat, because it just sounds nicer.
It does. It sounds smart and fancy and like it's going to go very well. So please walk us through the depth chart now.
All right. Let's begin. Let's go left to right, starting the forward. On the wings, the Flames have some guys. You know, Huberdeau had a good season last year. Mangiapane is a UFA in 2025. Connor Zary is a really nice find. Both him and Pospisil, although time will tell if either of those guys migrate to center before too long. Mm-hmm. William Stromgren, really good season. Honzek, injury prone last year, just had terrible luck, but he's a guy, again, another guy that could eventually migrate to center. Up the middle, the top two are Old Faithful, Kadri and Backlund. Sharon Govich,
maybe a center.
Yeah, they have. I think the challenge with the Flames is they have, on a team with depth, everyone's down a rung, and the problem is they don't have as much depth they did, say, 2 years ago. And so Kadri is a 1 that could probably be a 2. Backlund's a 2 that should probably be a 3.
Sharon Govich is a 3, but probably should play the wing.
Rooney's a 4.
Yeah.
Sam Morton was really good down the stretch, but we haven't seen a full pro season from him.
Yeah,
we've only seen like 20 games.
month or two of pro hockey. Yeah,
so they got some guys. Right side, Kuzmenko is a pending UFA. Coleman is probably their most consistent forward last year. And then Coronato had a really good learning year, but the numbers weren't quite there. But I think if you look at his April and you look at his October, you see a definite progression, but it's a process for him. Yeah. And meanwhile, beyond that, he has some guys that are either quad A guys or depth guys. So they have some guys, the UFA or RFAs. Pelche is something, Klapka is something. Schwint can play wing or center. He was really good in the last 2 months of the season when everybody was up in the NHL, and he had to be their top center. And Schwint was
for the Wranglers, you said.
For the Wranglers, yeah. And I think quietly Schwint might have been their most underappreciated forward because he was the guy that kind of held things together. But if you look at the guys they have, they don't have a lot of grade A prospects, I would say, and I these gentlemen will probably regurgitate that as well. They have a lot of good, but not a lot of great upfront.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some prospect rankings throughout the year drop, and there is an increase in the number of players that you would like to have in your system, but there still seems to be a deficit of the impact-making prospects that might have a blue chip or the letter A next to them. Is that a fair assessment from your perspective, Derek?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you look at the players in the system, the guys that Pike just mentioned, you don't really see a lot of guys that truly project as first line players or, top pair defensemen.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe Coronato is the first line winger. Maybe like Jeremy Poirier could play top 4D in the future.
Yeah, and we'll get to the D card in a moment. But
Yeah.
I mean, they're just what you saw in that four group. There just isn't a star forward there.
No,
Maybe Coronato.
maybe Coronato.
Maybe Suniev. Suniev
Maybe
in
top
another
6.
year, maybe.
The challenge with Suniev, and Byron will get to it, is that the probability isn't high of that based on where he's played and the production he had. And to give people a little background on your model, as we always should do to start the program, Derek, you guys are a scouting organization. Of course, you don't ignore data, but you're scouting. Byron, your approach is quite different, and I love it because I think it gets rid of some scouting blind spots, or at least maybe can indicate what things data can help add to a scouting profile.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, like even with a guy like Suniev, when you look at how he's progressing, he goes to college and, he has a decent year. But when you look at the players that were, where he was at the draft and then what he did in college, the numbers that I'm looking at, where it's kind of like this translation, standardized score, basically, where you can look at all the players across the same level playing field.
Yeah.
He didn't really move, which is like a really bad thing. He kind of stagnated. So it's like almost like a long shot that he's an NHLer at this point, and a star is like very long shot. So
right, and your model you'll separate into probability of being an NHL player and probability of being a star, which is important because, as we've noted, it looks like could be a large number of NHL players in their system, but they don't have stars. That's an important differentiation.
Exactly. Like, they have Pelche, they have Zary, they have Coronato. They all profile pretty good in terms of like an NHLer probability, like way over 50%. I think Coronato's up to 75, 80% type thing. Zary looks like he's going to get there too. But like in terms of like a star profile, like you want to have these blue chippers in the system where you look at them and you're like, oh yeah, like that guy, the minute he plays in the NHL, he's going to become a star. Like a Luke Hughes, Jack Hughes, all these types of players. Like the Flames don't have really any of these type of guys.
And to be fair, a lot of the guys that they have selected in the top 10 are gone, as we've seen in the Stanley Cup final. Many of them are in that series.
What was Coronato drafted? 13?
Yeah.
And the rest of the guys were in the mid to late 20s. So
it's
totally kind of a byproduct of where they were.
And so we'll get to the draft results, but let's go back to the forward board just for a moment, because while they're missing stars on the wings, you could probably, Jonathan Huberdeau certainly was that 2 years ago. I don't know that he ever gets near that again, but the real challenge I see for Craig Conroy, who's now almost a year, I guess around a year into this full-time position, probably over here. Your two centers, 1 and 2, are in your mid-30s, and you don't have a young prospect center. You've got some depth guys, Ryan, but you don't have a 17, 18, 19-year-old stud that plays center ice.
No, they have guys with potential. Pospisil was really good at the Worlds before he got hurt, playing primarily up the middle. Connor Zary played the last 3 weeks, and he played center in junior. So I would say this about the Flames forward group. They have a lot of interesting players. I would say they have very few truly exciting players. They have guys who could play and could be useful, reliable, good NHL players. They don't have anyone that you look at and say, that's going to be the guy you build the team around.
So Byron, how do you feel about sort of the positional stuff? I think everyone would understand that go ahead and take the best player, but do you see a distinct need there, or the need's just as great elsewhere that you don't worry about position, go get a star?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards the star front. They don't have the Johnny Gaudreau coming. They don't have the Matthew Tkachuk coming. Like, it's just a bunch of like okay guys. So, I mean, obviously like center is the highest priority position if you can get the star center, but you're probably not going to get that at 9th. Like, fair. Maybe Hellenius, maybe, but like you probably just want to go with best available. And in my opinion, best available, highest star likelihood that like can, like is a piece that you can build around, whether it's a winger or a defenseman or a center.
Yeah.
At this point.
And your thoughts on where the Flames are at right now? I know that it feels like this has been, like we said, only 5 guys from the Battle of Alberta, but they really only committed to taking a step back months ago at the deadline or before it when they moved Lindholm. Like, these are early days in what probably isn't a quick turnaround.
Yeah, no, they're kind of, playing around the corners a little bit in the summer. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we can be a playoff team. Then, it was pretty clear pretty early on that they weren't going to be. And now they're flirting with that rebuild thing. So, it's a terrifying thought because it could be, is it the 5-year perfect New York type rebuild, or is it the Buffalo Sabres? We're going to go for 15 years. Like, that's a frightening thought, but yeah, they're in the very, very early stages and not a lot there to work around yet. So.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that, Derek, and just maybe how crucial the next few drafts will be, given they've got multiple picks. We'll talk about this year, 2 in the first, 2 in the second, 2 in the third, 2 in the fourth. They've got Vegas's unprotected 2016th. They still haven't played a few cards they can to get more picks, and they might have their own in the top 10, or they won't have their own in next year's draft.
Yeah, I think they've done a good job with asset management with what they got in the Lindholm trade, the Tanev trade, the Hannafin trade. Like, they've got good pieces. They can certainly pull together a lot of quantity of prospects, but as we were just talking about, they don't have that true blue chipper.
Yeah.
So I think it should be a focus of the Flames this year to maybe swing a little bit, or at least try and look for players that have high upside.
Yeah.
Every year there are prospects that project really nicely to the NHL, but maybe they're low ceiling, high floor guys. Sometimes you get players who have a lot of skill, but might have 1 or 2 red flags or areas that they really need to work on. But sometimes those are players that can really pop. Yeah. And then if that works out, you've got, a top line forward or a top pair defenseman. With regards to best player available or position, you can kind of do a little bit of both with where the Flames are picking this year. I think there's so much discrepancy this year from 2 all the way to about 12 or 13.
Yeah.
When it comes time for the Flames to pick at number 9, you can't really say this player is going to be the best player available, because you're going to get 10 different opinions as to who the best player available is. So at that point, there is a little bit of wiggle room for the Flames to look positionally, whether they want to try and look for a center or a star defenseman. I don't think it'll be hard to fault them if there's 3 guys that are arguably the best player available and they pick one that fits a need that they have the most.
Yeah, I think that's a well-made point. They might have 3 or 4 or 5 guys even in the same box and say, we value these guys the same. And one's an offensive defenseman. The other might be, a flashy winger. The other can play the middle, but maybe doesn't have upside. Like, they're not going to be, there's going to be lots of options at 9. And I think we'll get into that volatility as we start to dive into the draft class in a moment, but we kind of left behind the depth chart. So let's go look at the Flames D-core right now, which has been leaned out incredibly. This was a group that, if you had Oliver Shillington, and you did for a heartbeat at training camp, you had a Shillington Zadorov third pair and one of the better top 4s in the NHL. They deleted that entire second pair, which was their best defensive pair, in Tanev and Hannafin. Shillington has not yet signed a contract. If you're watching this now and he is, congrats to everyone involved. Why did this take so long? But there just isn't a lot there. You've got Weegar and Anderson at the top, Ryan. Those are absolutely good NHL defensemen. Maybe not the best Rasmus Anderson year, but you can say that's a top pair in the NHL. Sure.
And those
but then after that, it's guys that were on waivers or beyond top 6 on everyone else's depth chart. Hanley waivers, Pahal waivers, Miramanov 8th, huge injury history, tools, but there's nothing that looks like a second pair here.
They have 2 guys left over from the beginning of last season in terms of guys who were on their depth chart who have contracts. That's kind of insane to me, but that's just sort of how things are going. And I think we've seen Weegar really emerge as potentially a top pair guy. I think
the track record in Florida would back that up at time he spends with Ekblad there. Right?
I would argue he's probably their best defenseman right now. But beyond that, like, Anderson, very good. Hanley's a role guy. Miramanov, we'll see. He's only played 20 games, so the jury's still out on him. I think he was included in McKean's prospect list because
despite being 26,
because he's played less than 60 NHL games, so you don't know what he is yet.
That's fair.
And so they have a lot of guys that project as role guys. It's very, to me, there's a group of Flames prospects who are, as you would say, all gas, no brakes. Brustevich, Poirier, Morin, and then they have a bunch of guys that are mostly brakes, very little gas in terms of Grushnikov. I put Pahal in that line. Kuznetsov, Ilya Solovyov, who took a big step in last year. I'd say Axel Hertig's in that category too. Okay. But they don't really have anyone that's sort of like an all-arounder the way, say, a Weegar is, where you can put Weegar anywhere and he'll give you good minutes. Everybody they have in the system arguably is someone you have to shelter to one way or another.
Yeah, and I'll ask the question to you guys. Like, what are the odds that any of those guys are top 4 defensemen on a championship caliber team, not on one plug and holes? Like, does Hunter Brustevich have the ability to round out the edges to put with that great offensive profile to be a top 4. Is there more on Grushnikov than he's ever shown? Because there's very little statistically anywhere. You might be nasty and mean and defensive, but you've got to be able, if you're going to play top 4 minutes, to move the puck out of your own end, and you're going to pick up secondary apples. He hasn't been doing that. Like, anyone in the system that you're particularly more high on than others? I know Moran's maybe the more recent one in terms of second rounder last year.
Poirier is kind of there as well. Brustevich, I like him. Like, he's progressing really nice, and his D+1 year was massive. There's, a lot, like reading the scouting reports and stuff, there's a bit of red flags there, maybe that it's like too offensive, and he doesn't kind of have that all around game like Pike's sort of talking. But like the progression there, I really like him. And then Moran, and then Poirier. Those are the 3 that I sort of like as somebody that maybe could be like a PP1 QB if everything hits right type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, those like all around, defensemen that you need, the Pesci's and the Slavins and stuff, like they don't have that type of player like in the system at all. So they've got some okay ones, but nothing again that's like screaming, oh yeah, like he's going to be, a 60-point defenseman as soon as he hits it.
Yeah. Fair
thing. So,
and like, look, there's a lot of young players in there. Maybe some of them pop, but again, you're lacking a blue chip, you could argue, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's get to a position that maybe they do have a real blue chip prospect. I guess it's just one of those things until he proves it, he's never going to get the benefit of the doubt because he's a goalie that isn't 6'3".
You mean 4-time goalie of the year in various leagues goalie?
Is it 4?
Two and 2.
Oh, yeah, and an AHL MVP in his first year in the American League. That's not something we see on.
We're going to be playing a game called How Many of These Guys Are Still in the Organization in 12 months, aren't we?
Well, Jacob Markstrom could be gone by the time you're watching this. Dan Vladar has a salary that's made him hard to move, or he might already be gone. I believe it's just a 1-year deal for Ignatiu, who comes over after posting some good numbers in the 2nd division in Sweden and Finland in back-to-back years. And really the conversation, fellas, is about Dustin Wolf, who could not do more statistically at this point of his career, but yet no one will say he's going to be anything until he shows it at the one level, the hardest level, the NHL. And maybe that's unfair. Maybe it is fair. Well, how do you feel about goalies and size, Byron, or is it just data? Guys are shooting in the same size net in every league. Yeah, well, like from the skater side, like I'm not as bothered by the size thing, even just looking at the data and stuff. But from the goalie side, size is very important. And Wolf certainly doesn't have that. He's very, very tiny when you watch him in the net and stuff. So if like the model is kind of like 50-50 chance on him, and it's because basically he's so small. And so he had the same numbers at 6'3". What's the model saying?
Yeah, I think he would be at like 75% chance of like being an NHLer at this point, but like it really kind of dings him because he's so tiny.
And that's just so he has to be a statistical outlier to make it essentially.
Yeah, I mean, who is a goalie in the NHL that's like basically 6 feet or below? Like Saros, and then who else is sneaking in?
You could make a case though that we've been hearing very like. I was at that draft in 2019 where he was the 4th and last guy drafted.
7th round. Yeah.
Dating back to when he broke into the Western League as Carter Hart's backup, the entire thing was, oh, well, he's going to have to be a statistical outlier to be a good Western League goalie. Oh, he's going to have to be a statistical outlier to be a good American League goalie. Yeah. And he's been a statistical outlier every level he's played at.
Yeah, that's a good point to make too. That said, it doesn't yet have him projected to be. Look, there's just not a lot of guys his size to get this far, right? It's just the numbers are against him, but he's beaten all the odds thus far, right?
He's become. I think if he plays a handful of more games next season, he'll be the first Flames drafted goalie since Trevor Kidd to play. I think over 30 games with the Flames.
I was gonna say like the really the only goalie they've hit on in the last ever is Laurent Brossoit.
You could make a case.
He had a decent career, but they like threw him in on the Schmid deal.
If outside of Trevor Kidd, it was Mike Vernon in 82, or 81. Like they've had bad luck picking netminders in any round.
There's probably some luck, and there's some other things too. Derek, thoughts on Dustin Wolf?
Yeah, it's NHL teams are always looking for what works in the NHL now. And they use that to provide value to players that they scout and the players that they draft. And Wolf statistically has been phenomenal. But like you guys were saying, there's just not a lot of goalies in the NHL who look like him or play like him. And there haven't been going back quite a few years now. Saros, he's about 5'11".
Halak had a nice career, but a little bit bigger than him probably. And he's also listed at 6, and
that's hard to say.
You see him standing on the blue line for anthems next to guys that are listed at 6, and you're like, I don't know if he's 6.
Yeah.
On. Yeah.
Say that again.
He's got skates on. They're measuring with the skates.
Yeah,
on or
maybe.
something. I
Right?
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, from where the Flames are standing, I mean, they got this guy in the 7th round. Like it's
free money.
It's free money. Any games he plays, that's a win. He's proven himself at the WHL level and at the AHL level. He deserves a chance.
Mhm.
He deserves that chance at least as the backup to see how he plays. And if he earns the starting job, by all means, give it to him, right? He's incredibly talented, incredibly smart. Like if you're looking at pure technical skills in a goalie, he's exceptional. Understanding of the position, exceptional. The way he tracks play, exceptional. Like he's a phenomenal young goalie. And
Lateral movements, really,
Yeah.
like you watch, you're like, okay, now I can see why he's the outlier to this point.
Yeah.
Because he can move around the crease with such ease, right?
Yeah,
Pace.
yeah. There's a lot of great tools to his game. You said earlier that the nets are the same size, but at the NHL, the shooters are better, generally speaking, than shooters in the dub and shooters at the AHL level. So it becomes a little bit easier to exploit the holes in a goalie's form when he's that size.
Sure.
A little more room over the shoulders or what have you. So there is some risk there. But I mean, at this point, with what he's proven at this far in his development, like you got to give him a chance at some point and just see where things go. I mean, and like you guys are saying, he's exceeded expectations up to this point.
Yeah.
It's hard to deny the possibility that he could continue to exceed expectations.
It's a tough spot for him and the team because he's going to be evaluated in a horrible environment for a while unless we see a serious couple moves to affect the blue line.
Yeah.
And that might be okay as long as everyone's patient and we trust the process and we throw away the standard numbers that we've evaluated goalies with for 50 years. I know by some of the expected goals numbers or goals saved above expected, he rated out better than Markstrom from the time they traded that second pair on. I don't think anyone's going to tell you he's a better goalie than Jacob Markstrom in the NHL, but the results for 2 months when he finally got a chance were. And so there are still reasons to believe in this. This isn't a bad stock. It's just a really, really volatile one.
And he posted his numbers in the AHL took a dip this year, but he was also here with him being the yo-yo guy and playing in front of what, to be very polite, was kind of a hollowed out Wranglers defense group by the end of the year.
Yeah, well, the Flames called up some guys for sure. Like we saw a lot of guys you didn't think you were going to be seeing this year on that third pair, like for Solovyov and Kuznetsov and, obviously Gilbert, but then Osterley down. He had a serious amount of time there. Then Pahal, like on and on it went. There was a lot of guys that should have been Wranglers if this team wasn't liquidating UFAs this year.
It's going to be an interesting 12 months, I think, for both the NHL and the AHL club because I think they have the ability to do a lot of different things at both levels. And both of the teams could have a radically different defensive group this season than they had in previous years.
So the needs are everywhere. But the good news is the Flames have lots of picks, and they also have lots of cap space if they want to go about things that way. In the first round, they select 9th and 28th, and they've got 2 picks in each of the next 3 rounds, 2, 3, and 4. No pick in the 5th, and they have, I believe, their own in 6 and 7. Let's take a look at the draft history for the last 9 years. We'll start with 2015 to 17. Correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, Pike, but this would have been Brad Sherliving's second draft, but the first we really would have had a chance to make the list rather than just show up and pick off it.
Yeah, 14 he showed up, and I'm still kind of amazed they let him sit at the table, but some teams are finicky about that and some teams aren't. But 15, I think, was probably one of the top 2 or 3 just do what you can with what you have drafts.
Okay. So we and I don't want to go line for line here. We're going to be 40 minutes into the show before we even talk about this draft class. But if you look at 15 at the bottom there, you end up pulling Anderson, Shillington, and Mangiapane out of a draft class where you didn't have a first rounder. Fellas, that's a huge win, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's one of the, looking at all the drafts that any team has ever done, looking at that draft and what they pulled out of that with the picks they had. So looking at the expected, what they should have got out of it, they maybe should have got one fringe NHLer and they got a top line D, a guy that maybe is still a top 4D and, a middle 6 winger. That's one of the best value drafts ever.
Except that they followed up with one better. They had way more picks, but when you pull Matthew Tkachuk and Adam Fox out of the same draft class, that's exceptional. Dylan Dubé's also in there, who, certainly in NHL, you're looking there at almost 200, almost 350 games.
Matthew Phillips, very good AHLer at the very least.
Yeah. And again, it hasn't affected the NHL roster. It's a good pick, but just the two superstars in one draft class, Byron, has got to be.
Oh yeah, like that.
Might be one of the greatest draft class of the last 10 years. As weird as that sounds to Flames fans.
Yeah. I mean, like getting two superstars from one draft is very, very rare. I mean, if you get two stars, like even guys that aren't quite at that superstar level, it's still really rare to get that from one team in one draft. I mean, typically teams draft like a star once every 3 or 4 years. So to get two superstars in one draft is just incredible value. So if they actually got Fox on the team and he played some games here, that would have been big win.
Yeah, that's what makes it tough to grade right
well,
there.
The reason why the Flames were even able to get Fox that late that year was because everyone kind of knew he was going to go 4 years and then become a free agent.
Yeah. And it's a unique situation for that to happen because a player has to be a late bloomer to stay in college for 4 years. Because if he's putting up the type of numbers he did in year 3 there, in his first year, you're hurting your own development by staying in that league. You're already dominating. So it was a certain combination of things. And I think it scared a lot of people saying, don't draft Americans. But I mean, as someone said to me the other day, it's like, draft's already hard enough. You start limiting passports, your success rate's not going up.
Yeah, 100%.
So then we look at 2017, didn't have a lot to do there with only one pick in the first 3 rounds, but Yusuf Alamaki, that's a mixed result. You feel for his offseason injury. That one really derailed him and has not looked like a star potential since then, or even a regular NHLer. Byron, I mean, that one offseason would have ruined his
like he was like skyrocketing up, and
Yeah.
then that injury where it took him out for the whole season, like basically stonewalled him at that point. So I mean, he was really trending up, and then he's worked out to be basically an average run-of-the-mill defenseman, but nothing special. But he was really trending up before that for sure.
And if you look at Flames history, some of the most disappointing draft selections, the common denominator is poorly timed injuries. Brent Cron got injured the year after he got drafted. The Flames had a first rounder that broke his ankle running down some stairs immediately after returning to college after being drafted. Valimaki loses a year and a half of development in his first 3 years. It's hard to come back from that.
Bennett with the shoulder.
Yeah.
Do you think that's factored who he's been as a player? I mean, it's a key developmental year. I shouldn't.
I mean, like that was that's like his big year. Like
he's
a
D+1.
young, summer-born kid, and he has a great season, gets drafted, 4th overall, and then he has an injury that takes him out basically right to the playoffs. So I think that hampered him a little bit. In terms
it's just funny
of what
because
he could have been.
His playoffs were so good, and then he scores 18 as a rookie the next year.
Yeah,
and he was really after that he dipped. Right, that was odd.
Yeah,
but maybe if he arrives on time, they exercise some different playbook with him. I don't know. Derek, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's such a key part of his development when that injury happened, right? Like from 18 to 23 or 24, like that's the most important time for a player's career. That's where the most growth happens, the most muscle development, the most skill development.
You kind of become who you're going to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and we've seen it with a lot of other players. They get hurt in that time frame if it's a serious injury. Some guys just never quite come back 100% to where they were. Bennett had a bit of a weird career. I don't know how much you can say the injury caused it. It just, at some point, it seemed like he just kind of fell out of the Flames. Like he wasn't the right fit anymore for the team. And, then his play took off after that trade to Florida.
Someone had mentioned it. There's 5 head coaches that he had a chance to impress and win a top 6 job from. He couldn't do it.
But that also probably didn't help him.
No, agreed. It goes both ways. He probably didn't need 5 different coaches, but it wasn't like one guy had it out for him either. Right. And I have this pet theory, and we're getting a little off topic, but I don't know that Sam embraced the player he's had to be great in the NHL while he was here with the weight of the highest selection in franchise history.
Yep.
And is a guy that I think thought he was going to be a number 1 center. Like he's a checking, absolute hardest working guy on the ice, heavy hitting middle 6 centerman. Yeah. Like if he's playing on the Oilers, he's a 3rd liner.
And as we saw with the depth chart, we'll get into that as we go along. If you look at the Sam Bennett, he got drafted and they were trying to figure him out. And then a couple years later, Matthew Tkachuk comes in, and Matthew Tkachuk was basically fully formed the moment he got here. And
took somebody's job. That's what Bennett couldn't do.
Andre Mangiapane, late round pick the year before, he had the time in the AHL that Bennett was not afforded. And then Mangiapane figured out what he needed to be. And by the time Mangiapane showed up, he was almost fully formed. Whereas Bennett, he took a little while to figure it out.
That's
and
true.
other guys figured it out quicker.
Okay, let's look at the 18 to 20 draft classes. There's 3 there. This is the middle third of Brad Treliving's tenure here. 2018, boy, you would have felt a lot differently about that Marty Pospisil pick, although it is a fourth rounder. That's kind of free money as well. If you sign your NHL contract, you're probably beating the odds as a fourth rounder.
Yep.
So that one looks like it. Not some decent cuts, though. They chased some ceiling in the fourth round as much as left's there. 19, Pelche, we're waiting. I didn't love his postseason, Ryan, but it's also, you're in the mid-20s of the first round. This is kind of you are going to need a while to figure out if a guy's a guy.
Yeah, then late round guy, ton of motor, ton of heart, skill depends on who you talk to, but he's always been. I'd say if you look at how he was in that one World Juniors, where he came in on the fourth line and they just used him to plug holes. Yeah. Maybe he'll be a Paul Byron type who just is used to plug holes on every which line he can. He has that versatility.
Yeah, and Wolf in the seventh round, we talked about it. That's. Yeah, you just hit the penny slot. That's unreal. Seventh rounder, you shouldn't be able to find players there. Never mind potentially a starting goalie in the NHL or even a platoon guy. 2020, Zary, they traded down twice, I believe, to select Zary, and it was in the 20s, not at 13 there.
They went down. They went from, I think, 22 to 24, then 24 to 26.
Yeah,
something like that.
Kuznetsov, this was not a great bet statistically with the defensive profile playing college. No. We'll see if he's anything or not. Poirier, you're chasing some offensive ceiling. He's had injury issues. And Solovyov, the last pick you made, might, Ryan, have the best chance of breaking camp with this team outside of Zary.
You take a toolsy, overager with size. They drafted him, as a 19 coming out of the O. He went back to the K, played a year in Minsk as a 6'7" guy in a K as a 20-year-old. Then 3 years in the Flames system, he's progressed, and he was up for the last little part of the regular season with the Flames. He would probably project as a poor man's Chris Tanev, all due respect to Chris Tanev and Solovyov. But I think if he turns into a B- Chris Tanev in the seventh round for a guy that had, basically was sort of on the scrap heap in terms of prospects, that's a really good find.
Last 3 years, this is the last two Treliving drafts and the first Craig Conroy one. Coronato at 13, big year for him as he went pro. Very good AHL results, Ryan, but you noted that it was not a dominant first NHL campaign. I don't know that he should have had one. It's a really hard thing to do coming from college.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure, especially jumping into the NHL like that early. Like, I think it was fine. Like, he kind of got like a little sample here, and then it was like, oh, I don't think it's working quite yet. And then they sent him down to the A, and he did great. And like, the way the model works for me is I always take where they kind of showed best, and he showed really well in the NHL. Like, I think that was like a fine development thing. They could see early on that it wasn't popping right away. So send him down, and I think he had a great year. So I think it'll help him going forward for sure.
Derek, a thought on this, like other organizations that were deeper, he might not have had a sniff of the NHL at all. It might have just been a straight full AHL year. And how differently might you feel about a guy if he's at a point per game in the A his first year pro? There was no failures at the NHL level, right?
Yeah, it's true. I thought Coronato had a pretty good season overall for his first year in pro. Is pretty much in line with what I expected. I expected the Flames to give him a call up, because they're going through this retooling phase or whatever you want to call it. They wanted to see what he could do. He showed something. I mean, he wasn't terrible. He didn't look completely underwater, so that was good.
And he showed improvement, Ryan, as you noted.
Yeah, I would say I have some affection for the players because I really like the way he plays the game, and I think you can make a lot of parallels between how the Flames are approaching things and how they handle Coronato, because he was given every opportunity to make the team. He made the team out of camp, and he deserves the spot. And then he was given an opportunity to keep a spot, but he was sort of just bounced around the lineup because they had bigger problems. Like, nothing was working in the first 10 games. It was not a Coronato problem. It was a Calgary Flames problem. Yeah. And then they sent him down in November. He gets some swagger back. He figures out the AHL game. He comes back up. Looks pretty decent. They sent him back down. And I thought, he came up in February. He came up like towards the last chunk of the season where guys started disappearing via trades. And I thought he was better and better as the year went along. I really liked how they used him in the bottom six, just in terms of allowing him. Like, a lot of the offensive guys are only good on offense. And I think if Coronato is going to be effective in the NHL, I don't think they have the ability to shelter everybody. Right. And so you need to have guys that can play everywhere. And they used him in the penalty kill of the A. he did a good job. They used him in a lot of different situations when he came back up. They had him playing on the fourth line with AJ Greer and Kevin Rooney, and I didn't think he looked out of place. In fact, I thought he helped create a lot of scoring chances for a fourth line that had not really done that all year. And I think he showed a lot of progression. I think he might have shown a bit more dimensionality to his game than I think a lot of people expected.
Yeah, I think if you had thought of, okay, he's just a shooter, you've missed how hard he can hound a puck in the O-zone. We saw more of that when he was in the A, and then at the end of the year when he was back up. It's like he had to adjust to pro hockey, and he made an adjustment. Is sort of how I saw it.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, and I think, I don't think he ends up as a fourth line guy when he matures. Yeah. But, I'd say, if you look at what makes Michael Backlund so damn effective, Backlund was sort of handled very similarly, where they, Brent Sutter basically parked him on the fourth line and said, okay, you're going to get heavy D zone starts, and you're playing with Tom Kostopoulos and whoever else is playing on the fourth line, and you're going to have to move the needle for us. And he figured it out. And I think there's some parallels with that, with how Coronato's going.
Let's look at Craig Conroy's first draft class. Honzek at the top, Moran in the second round, Suniev out of Penticton, who went to college, Lipinski, another Vancouver Giant, who had a very good year as a big centerman, and then Yegorov and Hurtig at the bottom. Did they chase enough ceiling with Honzek, or are we overreacting to an injury-plagued draft year, or could it be both?
It was more of a ceiling pick than a safe pick.
Really?
At least that's the way we saw it in the Keens.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a guy with size, who's got mobility, who's got good puck skills. Like, if everything were to come together for Samuel Honzek, you've got a top 6 forward there, and possibly a guy who could play center. We were hoping to see him play a lot of center this year. Didn't happen. But again, injuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the nice thing about Honzek is he does kind of have a decent floor as well, because as a big guy who moves, well, you're always going to be able to plug those guys in the NHL somewhere. But Honzek, he was on a really nice trajectory in his draft year. He was rising and rising and rising up draft boards, not just ours, but others as well. And he just showed these flashes at times where he was a guy who could take over a game single-handedly. They weren't there all the time, so there was a bit of a swing that the Flames made to take him as high as they did. It was risky, there's no doubt about it. But, if it would have just gone a little bit differently, if you would have had some better injury luck, also would have played on a better team. The Giants as a whole this year weren't very good. Okay. It just wasn't a good situation for Honzek. So there was potential there, but it was kind of like you have to squint to see it. It's off in the distance.
What did the model think of him, Byron?
Yeah, kind of, older player, showed a little bit in his draft year, but certainly above average, but not like crazy numbers. And then his pre-draft year wasn't anything exceptional either. So it was, those ones I agree. Like he probably has like a high floor. Like I keep on saying, like he's kind of like a Marty Hansel, like that, like a third
pro body,
massive guy.
Right? Yeah.
Like that's what I could see him being. But in terms of like that star potential, didn't really ever see it. When you look at guys like that, especially that drafted like kind of out of like the top 10 like that, like they hit his stars like once out of 7 times. Like, okay, I really like Musty and Perreault were two guys that I was kind of like, hoping those were those really high ceiling, skilled guys that maybe have some other flaws, but you could get maybe a star out of those, and they're trending that way.
And so that was sort of my next follow-up, was that was considered an exceptional first-round draft class. Maybe it was the other options they had more than Samuel Honzek that is what maybe left some wanting more.
Yeah, that's
they left some guys on the board that had higher ceilings.
Yeah. I think there was like probably 4 or 5 guys that I really liked at that point that, when they went to Honzek, it was kind of like, could have been better was my immediate reaction when that happened.
Yeah. So. And then the injuries hit, and it's tough because you want a guy to dominate, and it's tough to dominate when you continually get injured and you're just getting back to full health and you're injured again, or you're playing through something. Connor Zary had a similar experience coming out of his, I believe, his first 2 draft years. He also had the COVID screw up, but the model wouldn't have loved his year at all, but the injuries are a thing.
They do happen. Yeah. So he kind of plateaued in the same way. I mean, he had that weird COVID year where he's in the AHL, and then he's, you can't really count too much towards it. And then he gets really badly injured in his D+2 year. And then, and he kind of plateaued out. So then it was like, oh, I don't know what this guy's going to be. And he, he's probably still not a star. Like when he's coming, he had a good couple first months, but now you're looking at him, he's probably like a 50-point guy, which is good.
Great.
It's great value, but like, he's still not, hitting that like point per game type thing, or that, year in, year out, like 60 to 70 point guy. But yeah, he's a good player. But yeah, the injuries, you kind of see that in the model where, they still make the NHL. It's the same thing like with Bennett. Like they make the NHL, but they just never hit that mark that Derek's talking about, like where they were before. They never get back up to it. And they're always kind of on the treadmill trying to catch up. And then it's like, well, now there's all these prospects coming in and you just never catch up.
So. Yeah, think of it like a line graph, right? You're going up, and then the injury happens, and then you dip, and then you start climbing back up, but your trajectory's off. So you're not going to hit that same height that you might have if you didn't dip.
Interesting.
And Pinder, I'll say this. You mentioned all the injuries they had in Vancouver. Don't sleep on Jaden Lipinski.
He had a great year.
They were missing so many guys all year for all kinds of different reasons. Yeah. Lipinski was very quietly one of the top 2 or 3 face-off centers in the entire Western League. He took a ton. He won a ton.
Big body.
And yeah, he's big. He's American. But like apparently the good kind of American because he plays in Canada. And he's one of those guys that I don't know if he'll play in the entry level system this year simply because they have so many damn bodies. He could
play for the Wranglers is the discussion that you're talking about.
I could see him sort of be a Parker Bell this year where they sign into an entry level deal as a reward for how much work he's put in, send him back to the Dub as an overager. They burn the first year, but he gets his signing bonus. He gets a lot of reps in Vancouver as an overager. And then he comes up next year with a bit of swagger to him. Because I just think, the Flames had that trajectory with Parker Bell last year where they had so many bodies for the Wranglers that Bell wouldn't have gotten any reps. And I think we'll see how that goes next year with Parker Bell. But I think that's sort of the playbook with Lipinski.
Interesting. Okay, let's get to the actual draft. We're like 40 minutes in and we haven't goddamn. Hey, there is so much consensus in this draft, guys. Everyone agrees on who's going number 1.
Totally.
And then what?
And then from 2 to you tell me, I have seen guys and there's certain poster boys for it. And there's probably some guys that have smaller windows, but there's a lot of guys that you'll see in some mocks in the top 5 that are falling into the teens and others. Derek, you went out of your way to talk about it early. I think it's the theme of the draft. I thought at the beginning it might be it's the defenseman that'll be the theme of the class, and there are some great defensemen, maybe 6 in the top 10 potentially, but just this complete volatility team to team where you might have Salayev at 2 and someone else has him at 13. Like what? We talk about ledges at 3 and 5 and 8. You're talking about a 2 to what ledge here?
Possibly 12 or 13.
Wow.
Yeah. There are going to be guys that are 2 on some boards and 11 or 12 on others. 13 may be a bit of a stretch.
Okay.
But you'll get names like Parekh, Yakimchuk, Buyam. You get to about 12 names in total, I would say, that are right there. And then you've got a few other guys like Konsta Michael Brandt-Nygaard, maybe Michael Hage. Those guys could be top 10 players on some teams' lists. So there might be a guy that, everyone's like, oh, this is a consensus, top 5 or top 7 pick. That guy could still be there at 9.
What does the draft class as a whole look like to you, Byron? And for the model's lens, is this a typical class or is it different than others?
No, it's I'd say at the very top end, it is quite deep, like in terms of model projections. Like there's a lot of really good, look like future stars in there. And it extends kind of further down than most drafts. Like normally you kind of run out of like the really high value guys by like, pick 12 or 13, and then you're kind of down to like the next tier and then the next tier after that. And then by, the kind of back end of the top 30, essentially by my model, like you kind of have a bunch of guys that are all grouped together and they're sort of like above average, but nothing crazy. But like this draft, like the really, really good ones last like all the way down to like, 15, 20s. And then there's even like some really good potential model wise that goes all the way to, 30, maybe even to 35, 40 type thing. So I'd say it's deep at the top end, but there's not as many of those, pretty good looking bets that kind of extend into the 3rd or 4th round type thing. There's not as many of those. There's overagers. There's very few like of these overagers that are, popping in their D+1 or D+2 season that you always see coming through. There's like almost none of them this year. But at the top end, there's a lot of gems, it looks like.
And so the Calgary Flames will pick at 9 and 28. Never mind the very good player that you're hopeful you get a star at 9, but maybe at 28, you might be able to find a very good NHLer as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's going to be a couple guys that, in the model, they have a really good star profile, but like everything you read about them, like they're going to fall. Like a guy like Cole Hudson, Lane's brother.
Mhm.
I mean, kind of similar to Lane. Maybe he's not quite as dynamic, but
No, Lane just signed with Montreal, right? Very high
and he looks
prospect.
fantastic. And
Yeah.
like Cole actually looks better than Lane did in his draft year in the model. And he's like 6 months younger or 5 months younger. So, I mean, he's probably for sure going to fall out of the first round, I would guess. I mean, Derek probably has a better sense of that, but like that's a guy that could be around 28 that could be super high value for, somebody like the Flames to take there. So
let's talk about the only bit of consensus we have. Celebrini's not going to go to the Flames unless something absolutely insane happens, fellas. But talk about the player that's at one, and where are we at on the? He was the first player that year. Like, oh my God, what a year to pick first.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. I mean, what can be said about him that hasn't been said all season, right? He came into the year as the projected number 1 pick, and he did absolutely nothing to lose that spot. At no point did anyone ever really get close to him. He's just an incredibly well-rounded, talented center. There's nothing about his game that you could consider a weakness. I mean, everything about his game is honestly above average to well above average. Great skater, great shooter, great puck handler, really good defensive play. Like, he's just a really solid player, like excellent hockey sense. His dad is a strength and conditioning coach for the Golden State Warriors, I believe. So he's like, he's been around professional athletes his whole life. He understands the nutrition, the training, just what it takes to be a day-to-day professional athlete better than most players do, aside from maybe, the sons of former NHLers. So there's just something about Celebrini that there's just such a nice safety to him. It's hard to think of an exact comparable to him. For a while, I thought maybe like a Steven Stamkos. The one that most people kind of go to now is like a Jonathan Toews, where maybe he's never a guy who leads the league in scoring, but he's going to be there for any international opportunity. He's going to be a guy who can wear the C for his team, maybe wear the C internationally.
Wow.
He's going to be a guy that, come playoff time, you can play him 20 minutes a night in the cup finals, all situations, matchups, defending late leads. Like, he's going to be a guy that's just a workhorse for, I was going to say whatever team drafts him, it's going to be the Sharks.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a cool story too. He played some of his junior hockey in the Bay Area. So that's a huge win for the Sharks
Junior
marketing
Sharks.
department.
How about that? And then interestingly, he's a Vancouver kid, goes to the USHL, and then Boston University. When you see a player heading into their draft, playing at college, and you see these types of point totals, almost 2 points a game as a 17-year-old, this is off the chart stuff, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time when you see the very rare cases when you see a guy in his draft year in college putting up huge numbers, they're like older players. But he's like not even old enough to be in college yet. Like, he's like high school age, seems like.
So it's a year early to go.
Yeah, like he's a year early. So he's born in the summer. So he that's even like next level stuff. So I mean, yeah, you look at him like, translating from the USHL where he was great right into college. Like, again, just like Bedard last year. I talked about him a lot on the podcast last year, but he has that same profile where it seems like it's more common than it is, but it's pretty rare actually. But when you look like this, there's never been a player in the model in, basically 40 years of history that hasn't turned into at least a point per game superstar. And that's exactly what Celebrini looks like. So, I mean, might not lead the league in points, but he'd probably be damn close, I would guess. And I think he's going to be a heck of a player for sure.
Interestingly, we have Ivan Demidov at 2 on our 3 boards that we're looking at. We've got our daily face-off top list, as well as the 2, services that you guys have. Byron, your model hockey prospecting, and then, of course, Derek, you at McKean's. Demidov's 2 on all your lists, but there's a lot of places where he's not. And I don't know if that's a knock on him so much as maybe where he is and where he played. Would you have liked to see him play in the K or at least the V instead of the MHL over there?
Yeah, that would have been really nice. And there has been some talk about that possibly causing him to slide a little bit. I mean, not too much, maybe to pick 5 or 6, just because we haven't really seen him play at a really high level yet.
And then Russia's out of international stuff as well, right?
Yeah,
that's a huge piece.
Get to that, right?
Sorry.
A lot of these guys, we've seen them at the World Juniors, the Holinka, the U18s. We haven't seen them with Demidov. We also haven't seen him playing against pro competition like we have with a lot of other top prospects out of Europe.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of uncertainty there. Now, what Demidov did in the MHL this year was incredible. Just absolutely torched the league, crazy production. And when you watched him, it was just, he was such a dominant force game over game. Like other teams just could not contain him at all. And then he had a really good playoffs as well. So we did see him elevate his game at the most important time possible for his league.
Yeah.
You know, he led his team to a championship. So that's pretty impressive. But yeah, there's just a little bit of that uncertainty because you just haven't seen him compete against the best that his age group has to offer, or against, you know, international NHL competition at something like the Worlds. You know, we just haven't seen a lot of high-end hockey from, or at least a high-level hockey from him.
And so it wouldn't be crazy, Byron, to say that if this guy had a different passport, he might be showing up 2 on every list rather than most lists.
Oh yeah, I'd say for sure. I mean, he's had a little bit of injury history. He's kind of like a small, dainty guy, which maybe that throws you off a little bit. But yeah, I think if he was probably Canadian, he'd probably be second on a lot of lists. You know, like he again looks very similar to Celebrini in the model, like a almost like guaranteed superstar type profile.
Wow.
I would have loved to see him in the KHL just as sort of like a confirmation, because the MHL is such a funny league. So it's really testing the boundaries of the model, saying he's going to be a superstar coming from here. But, you know, he has that look to him. So if he was putting up sort of normalized standard numbers in the KHL that looked very similar, then you could say with kind of like a greater degree of confidence that, yeah, like this guy's going to be a stud, but I'm pretty sure he's going to come here and be a stud anyways. So
yeah.
It,
very different circumstances, Ryan, but similar to Mishkov last year, where it's like, it's a Russia problem. And it's like, why we know so much more about these other guys, whether it's contractual or international play. It just feels like a riskier pick, even if it's a better player.
And some of that's just Russia being Russia. I mean, you know, as the guys will attest to, every international group sort of has their own weird geopolitics that they operate within. In Sweden or Finland or even Czechia, if you're a high-end player, you're going to be playing high. You're going to be getting pro reps from like when you're 16, 17, just because they have an incentive to grow you. But you know, in some systems, you know, they don't push the guys up. And in some systems, like I know there's always, in some organizations, there's always some skepticism of just offensive numbers, because in the MHL, some teams are just built terrifyingly big. Some teams are like the Leafs, where they have so many resources and they can recruit and they can just load up their teams. And so some of these MHL teams barely look like a high school team. Some of these high school teams look like the damn Harlem Globetrotters. And the gulf between the haves and the have-nots in the MHL, and it's even in the KHL, is massive.
Yeah.
And he played on a have team.
Okay. Interesting. I love that what happens next, because I'm looking at Daily Faceoffs list. I'm looking at Hockey Prospecting and McKean's, and you each have a defenseman going here. None of you have the same defenseman, which underlines exactly what we're talking about with this draft class. Let's start with you, Derek. At McKean's, you've got the towering 6'7" defenseman from the KHL as your top D-man off the board. Do you not?
Don't think that's accurate.
Okay, well, so I'm sorry. So I might have written that down. Who have you got as coming off the board next?
I'm pretty sure it's Sam Dickinson.
Okay, so Dickinson is next off the board.
That, but I'm like 90% sure.
I got Dickinson on my McKean's list.
Yeah,
I must be reading off the wrong list, or I got the wrong one up there. My apologies. So tell us about Sam Dickinson out of the Ontario Hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just a defenseman who does a little bit of everything, and he does a lot of it really well. 6'3" defenseman, and arguably the best skater, forward or defenseman in this draft class. Yep, maybe Salayev. I would say that Dickinson would push him really, really well. He's just a very explosive, powerful skater, and he can also handle the puck really, really well at speed. It's not unusual to see him go end-to-end as the trailer or the carrier and to finish off a play. He's strong. He's super athletic. He had some of the best results at the Combine recently, and he's playing for the London Knights, and that's something that really does give him a boost. This is an organization that has the best track record when it comes to developing prospects, including defense prospects. You go like Evan Bouchard, Logan Mailloux, despite all the off-ice stuff with him, he's turned into a very, very good defenseman. He had a great year in the AHL this year. And, there are some issues with Dickinson with his play reading sometimes. His decision-making can be a little suspect, but you kind of have to trust the London model and what they're able to do with players. Now, this year, London won the OHL title. Dickinson got the benefit of going through a deep playoff run. That's very valuable experience for a player. And he's probably going to do the same next year. London's bringing back like everybody. like all their top players. So they're already looking like a team that's probably going to win the Memorial Cup next year with like Easton Cowan, Oliver Bonk, Denver Barkey. Like they're going to have a star team once again. He's probably going to be playing for Canada at the World Juniors, if not this year, next year for sure. So he's just in a really, really good spot to keep growing his game. As of right now, he's maybe not the third best player in the draft. I would say as of right now, Artyom Levshunov is certainly a step above. But when you look at long-term trajectory, that's where we are with Dickinson. We think that over time, just through the situation he's in and the tools that he has, we think his game is going to grow really, really nicely on a nice steep upward trajectory. And when it's all said and done in 10 to 15 years from now, we think he's going to be the second or third best player to come out of this draft class.
A couple words on Dickinson, Byron.
Yeah, I love him too. Big, super young, really good numbers this year. Like kind of looks like a Owen Zellweger, He's a good skater like him too, and he's big. So yeah, I love him. Like I have him a little bit deeper, but it's just basically because there's some guys really going nuts this year. But yeah, I really like him.
It's a particularly strong defensive class, we believe, right? So someone might like Dickinson the most, but that doesn't mean that if someone doesn't have him high, he isn't going to be a great player, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you compare him to say Hunter Brustevich, and granted, we've seen a lot less of Brustevich in sort of high octane situations, but I mean, like Derek said, I would not bet, much like there's a handful of organizations I look at and go, that team knows how to develop high-end prospects. London's been up there for years. It's basically like London, the Chicago Steel, and a couple others. And, especially, I don't think you can discount the Mark Hunter factor, because Mark Hunter knows what NHL players look like at every gate, and he can help maneuver you. And I think just having access to that kind of infrastructure in London on and off the ice is huge. And, he's someone I think, I'd say Brustevich, except much more well-rounded.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say with Dickinson, like there's, a lot of appeal long-term, but even this year, like he was playing a top 4 role on a team that won the OHL title and came within a couple goals of winning the Memorial Cup. Yeah. Playing 25 minutes a night, a lot of situations, wasn't on their top power play most of the time, but still put up a lot of points. Like, even though we're looking long-term with him, he still had a very, very solid year in his draft year.
That's fair. To be the impactful Memorial Cup guy, there's a few, and a lot of them are really good. Matthew Tkachuk did it in Red Deer, and we saw, was it Halifax hosting that one year? There was a bunch of top end picks, but there's not often top 4 minutes for 17-year-olds on those contending teams. Let's get to another defenseman. I see him at 3 on Daily Faceoff. Levshunov, who is at Michigan State, a Belarusian defenseman. If Craig Conroy could only be a little higher, he could keep his Belarusian Russian defenseman fetish alive, but who knows? Maybe there's another option by the time he picks at 9. I don't know that he's going to get to 9, and there's a lot of speculation he might be going at 2, although, again, place to place, a lot of variance. What does the model think about Levshunov?
Yeah, it looks great. Kind of profiles similar to Victor Hedman and Rasmus Dahlin, obviously coming from different leagues, but
so offensive profile is the first thing I think of.
Yeah. And I mean, when you read, the scouting reports and stuff, like he sounds like very well-rounded. Like he's not just all offense. He's big, he's strong. Like so there's not that kind of concern where, he looks great in the model, but it's all offense. Like, reading the other stuff, it sounds like he's very well-rounded and yeah, he looks really solid. Yeah. So.
Yeah, like Celebrini, just a really well-rounded player. He's the type of guy who can play, right now about 27, 28 minutes per game without breaking much of a sweat. At the NHL level, he's probably going to be 20 to 25 in all situations. Big guy, right shot, which always adds so much value to NHL teams. Skates really well, plays on his toes. Like he really loves to play at a high pace. He loves to rush the puck. He'll chase a big hit every now and again. He's got this persona on the ice that's really exciting because there's always this opportunity or this chance or this feeling that something big and exciting is going to happen whenever he's out there, which is, that's fun to watch as a fan. But the appeal for NHL scouts is obvious. I mean, this is a guy that can do everything, log a lot of minutes. He's super strong and athletic. Like he's going to be a guy who can grind and eat heavy minutes and, withstand heavy forechecks and still go out there 2 shifts later and, not be worn down, not be tired. But there's skill. Like this is a guy who can work a power play. This is a guy who skates really well. He can move the puck in transition. He's good on the rush. Like he's got kind of everything you want out of a defenseman. Maybe nothing super, super high end. I do worry a little bit about what the offensive ceiling is going to look like. He's not going to be probably a 70 or 80 point guy, I would say. But I could see him being, a 50, 60 point defenseman who also, is playing 25 minutes a night on the top pair.
Scouts I've talked to basically say he plays like he's 30 as a compliment. Like he's composed, he's
Poised.
mature. You often see guys succeed in college because they're big, and he's not big, but he plays bigger than he is. And I think the fact that he's got that maturity, and he's still so young, and he's playing a lot in a pretty good program. There's a lot of things to like about him.
Okay, so we've talked about 4 guys, 2 forwards, 2 defensemen. I want to get to the monster Salayev because I just find him so intriguing, and it also is like the type of guy that I just think a large room of general managers, certain guys they're not letting this guy past him. Whether their model may not. It's just like he does things that are very rare, and that people, whether it's based in fact or not, believe come with winning because he's 6'7", he skates incredibly well, and he's immensely physical. Where does the model have him, Byron?
So I would say he looks okay model-wise. He's kind of young. He's born in April. Massive guy. He's playing, like you mentioned, he played in the KHL basically the whole year. He didn't really get like a sample anywhere else. And he put up some numbers, nothing really remarkable. And then, he doesn't have – it's not like he has – a previous year from the MHL backed by huge numbers where you can say, oh, well, if he went to the MHL, he probably would have done about the same in the MHL, again, on a sort of standardized scale. I am a bit fearful of him getting drafted too early. I mean, I'm not a scout, but I watched the videos and stuff, and like he is a unicorn. Like the way he skates and the way he can like cut off people so fast at somebody just so gigantic is crazy. But when you look at these, again, he's more of a unicorn, but when you look at like these big, huge guys that are drafted like really early in the draft, like when do you sort of like, yeah, that was worth taking that top 10 pick or that top 15 pick? Like it rarely happens. Like even like a guy like Tyler Myers, I can't remember where he was taken 13th or something, but even
Something
him,
like
like where was
something like that.
Yeah. Like what is he, was he worth 13th? Maybe. I mean, I think he won the rookie of the year when he came in. He was kind of okay, but then he's kind of this okay career. Like he's like,
I think it could Branson too. Like there's a guy
like
that's
he's like the
huge
best of the
and you
bunch.
draft him.
Yeah. He went 3rd overall. I'm like, is Branson worth that? Like, I don't
No.
think so. So, and then you kind of read the reports and it's like, oh, like he could be Zadorov. And it's like, well, Zadorov is not worth a top 10 pick.
So went there and he's on his 15.
Like, like, so I like him as like more of like something maybe in like the very late teens or like the 20s, but he's not going to go there. Like there's just so many teams that are in love with him. But I just think there's a risk of like, you're not going to get enough of him at such an early pick,
I think one of the best ways to describe it with people I've chatted with in the scout community is like, there's a huge difference between, like Jamie Alexiak and Victor Hedman, and no one really is sure where to place him on that spectrum. He's probably not either, but you could land a 747 in that, spread between those two guys, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much the case with Salayev, right? There's just not a lot of prospects who look like him. A guy that size who skates that well, and a guy who's playing, in the KHL all season. Super rare, hasn't really been seen before. So there's it's hard for scouts to kind of get an idea of what to make of him.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see a prospect and he just reminds you so much of guys you've seen before, similar statistical output, similar tools, similar, organization and career path. Salayev is that kind of unicorn where no one really knows what to make of him. The tools are great. I mean, the size is obviously a huge advantage. It's never going to go away, but so is the skating. Like this guy has potential to be an incredible play killer. You look at like defending the rush against the likes of Nathan McKinnon or, Connor McDavid, you need guys who can skate, and having a guy his size with that reach, that's such a huge advantage because you can control that space so well with him in it. Early on in the season, there were flashes of offensive upside.
Mm-hmm.
He was jumping up in the play more often. He was carrying the puck. And that's what got scouts really, really excited. Like, oh my God, this guy could be the next Victor Hedman. But then that part of his game really dialed back. But it's tricky because it's hard to know if that was just him just not being good enough to keep doing it, or if maybe that was the coaching staff being like, okay, you're 17. we don't want you trying to be Cale Makar out here because we're a KHL team. We're still trying to win.
Yeah.
And that's been something I've been trying to figure out a little bit more of. That's been something I've been talking to scouts about. No one seems to really know whether his offense was intentionally reined back to make him a little bit safer. So there's just so much uncertainty about this guy. But the appeal of scouts is what they think that they can get out of him once their development staff has had a chance to work with him, right?
So Char is the first name that comes to mind when you say that, because he was not a very good pro early in the sense that he had a lot of learning to do. He wasn't a great junior player, but the one thing you can't teach is the size and the frame. And if we can work on the other stuff, he ends up being arguably the greatest free agent signing in NHL history, one of the greatest captains of, our adult lives, and a cup winner. This guy is fascinating to me.
I'll say this. The Siliev feels like the model versus eye test battle manifest in the human being. I think some GMs and head scouts are going to go to Dan Milstein's KHL camp in Florida, and somebody's going to be like, okay, blow up the list. We're putting this guy up top because he's the kind of human body that you project hopes and hockey dreams onto, because he's so damn big and he was able to play a regular shift in a very good league. He did not move the needle offensively consistently, as Derek mentioned, but you look at him and you go, oh, damn, imagine if he played in the Western League. He would have had insane numbers based on his skill set. Probably. And that's the big challenge.
And then you take away the international play because of the Russia factor. And it's like, here we are again. Like this, you can see why these guys might slide.
Yeah. There's definitely some risk to Siliev because there's so much like wish casting. It's like we hope that he can do this, and like he could become this. He could be this defenseman who does all these things. It's just it hasn't fully been seen yet. So I mean, I'm sure that there is going to be a team probably in the top 5 that's like, you know what, screw it. Like we think we can work with him. We know it's a risky pick, but like we need a star. Or maybe you're a team like the Ducks at 3 who've done really
GM's profile.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of D already. He doesn't have to be a top pair guy for it to work. Like, I keep thinking of the Ducks and what Pat Verbeek likes and what he doesn't.
Yep.
Yeah. And he's like, before he got there, they were kind of drafting a very hockey prospecting friendly draft, the lad, like they had like 2 or 3 drafts in a row where I was like, yeah, like nice pick there, the Zellweger and all these picks. And then when he came, they changed it and they started drafting a little bit different and drafting bigger and drafting safer, that type of thing. So I could see them interested in him.
And I think maybe it's an organization that's a little more insulated with a lot of prospects, or doesn't have to have a star in the sense that you might have them on the way already. You're just looking for another piece to that championship club, but careful, don't miss a real good star by taking this guy. It'll be interesting to see where he goes. He's fascinating to me. We're on the D run, so let's keep it going. Zeev Boyum of Denver University, freshman, wins the national championship and put up some pretty impressive numbers in his first year of college, if I'm correct.
And won the World Juniors gold medal with the United States. I mean, just incredible season, and a huge step forward for him. I watched him last year with the national team development program. I thought he was okay. Didn't really see him as a first rounder. And even coming into the season, I kind of had a lot of reservations about him, but all he's done all season is just get better and better and better and keep proving himself. Really, really smart player, great work ethic. He's got a great personality to him. Like he's very competitive. He's very driven. He kind of leads by example on the ice. He's always working. He's always moving his feet. A lot of skill there. He grew a little bit this year, overcoming some of the size concerns that were there. I wonder a little bit about the pure skill level. He's blown up some pretty good NHLers out of the water in terms of draft year production for defensemen. He outscored Quinn Hughes, outscored Luke Hughes, outscored Adam Fox. So there's a lot there that's really appealing. But he also played on a really good team that had a lot of depth. And we're seeing a little bit more than lately, just the really good programs in the NCAA stacking up. There's no draft. There's, very loose rules about recruitment. So
now the portal window you add to that, right?
Exactly. So a lot of the strong teams get stronger every year and the weak teams stay weak. So there were times where I watched Boyum and it's like, yeah, he put up a goal and 2 assists this game, but his team won like 6-0. And, he didn't have to work all that hard to put up those points. So I wonder a little bit about that. when I watch him, I see really good puck skills and really good skating, but maybe not the same offensive chops as an Adam Fox, not the same skating ability as a Quinn Hughes. I'm a little bit cooler on Bouillon. I have him closer to maybe about 12 or 13 on my personal list. He's a little bit higher on McKean's because some of our scouts like him more. But I certainly see the appeal. And, if a team picked him top 4, top 5, like I wouldn't be surprised because there is that chance that he becomes, a top pair offensive defenseman and a power play quarterback.
Hockey Prospecting loves Bouillon.
Loves him. Yeah, he looks very, very similar to Perek and Levshunov. But what he has to him is that offensive production we talk about in his draft year in college is not just high. He has the highest equivalency of anybody in the model, not Bobby Orr. So, when I see that, I'm like, well, I'm going to jump him up the list a little bit because, you just it's just so off the charts, outlier high that, I love him. And I have him, I think, at 4th. But, if he went 3rd or whatever, I think he's going to be an
well, you got Levshunov 5. He had the monster points.
Yeah. Right? I just like Bouillon a little bit better because he has sort of this very outlier number. I'm all about the equivalencies. And when I see something like that, it's like, oh, okay. I take note. Anybody in the realm of that has turned into a star and he's flirting with, Bobby Orr. So at that point, you got
good comp.
Yeah. You got to take note of that. So I'm just watching him stuff again, not a scout, but I've watched him the way I describe him is just fun as hell. He comes up the ice and he's always on the offensive side, especially, he's always scouring who's coming where. He's kind of thinking a couple moves ahead. And then when he gets in the offensive zone, he's, he passes here and he kind of goes behind the net and he comes back on D and he's just all over the place, in a very unique way to create offense that, I think he's going to be a ton of fun in the NHL and he's going to be a big star too. So
what do you know about the DU Pioneer, Ryan?
Oh Lord. I think Derek nailed it. He's in a good program and he's been put in situations where he can excel. But he's excelled. He was one of the best players for a team that won gold at the World Juniors. He was one of the best players, perhaps the best player for a team that won the NCAA championship. And, he was consistently whether they were playing against, some random team or one of the big guns in his conference, he was consistently the man on his team as a very young teenager, a true freshman. So, I don't know what more could have been asked of him, but he was throwing a lot of fastballs and he hit a lot of home runs.
Fair. I want to finish the D class off because, and there's more to come, but I feel like we've heard, is there 6? Is there 5? Carter Yakimchuk feels like its own animal. And these 5 guys I see in more similar spots than Yakimchuk, who's low on a lot of lists, but high on a few, which I want to talk to both of you about in a bit. We'll call it the big 5 and we may be proven wrong, but Zane Perek would be the other one. And you've got him awfully high at Hockey Prospects, if I'm correct, Byron.
Yeah. Just slightly higher than the other 2. Basically because he's got the same numbers in his draft year, which are again, that outlier 99.5 percentile type thing. But in his pre-draft year, he had really, really good numbers, Quinn Hughes type numbers as well. So, when you see that in the model, there's only a couple that kind of look like that, but it's kind of a 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 that look like that, turn into a star or superstar. So I'd have him a little bit higher up there, but there's those 3 defensemen all look insanely high up there. And I just have him a little bit higher because he profiled a little bit better in his pre-draft year, which kind of works in the model. But
it's probably more comfortable for scouts too, when you can see a guy repeat success rather than something being where was this last year?
Yeah, Perek is a very, very special talent. He obviously put up incredible numbers this year, and he did it as the main driver on that team. Saginaw was good overall. They had some good pieces, but they didn't really have anyone at his level. There were a lot of times where he was the guy driving the bus for that team offensively as a defenseman at 17 years old.
And a team hosting the Memorial Cup.
Yeah.
That would have loaded up.
And he had a big game and a big tournament, really. He was great at the Memorial Cup. And I think that really bolstered his draft stock. He's, not the biggest guy, but he moves really, really well and just thinks the offensive zone incredibly well. Just his vision and his creativity in the offensive zone are incredible. Excellent puck skill, dangerous shot from the point for a guy who's not overly strong, really sublime playmaker and passer. there's not really a lot of players like him in the NHL. You know, I've seen Erik Karlsson as kind of a comparable, and there are some similarities there in terms of at least what you can kind of expect from him in the NHL level. Probably a guy who quarterbacks your first power play, probably plays on your first pair, as long as he has a defensive partner on his left side who can help, cover up some of his mistakes. He's going to be a guy who scores a lot of points. Maybe not your number one defenseman, maybe not a guy who can play in all situations, but you want him out there a lot because he's going to generate a lot of offense. And, those are important players to have on an NHL team.
A big year.
He had 4 more points than Hunter Brustevich did. The only OHL defenseman to score more points than Hunter Brustevich in the entire league. And he's 13 and a half, 14 months younger than him. So he's very similar. I think if you have, I agree with Derek. I have similar sort of like well-roundedness qualms about his game, but holy moly, can this guy create offense? And, if you're the Flames, as much as they love Brustevich, imagine having 2 of them.
Well, and to be fair, in 13, 14 months, he's not going to be doing what Brustevich did. He's probably been playing in the NHL.
Oh, yeah. Imagine him with an extra, like, you feel his 19, 18-year-old year with, strength and conditioning and beef him up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Coach up the D side a little more, although the Karlsson comp is an interesting one. I mean, that's an incredibly lofty ceiling to chase offensively. Mm-hmm. But when you say that name, everyone understands. Like, oh, okay, well, he's not going to be great defensively. So we'll just have to settle with him maybe being the highest scoring defenseman in the league.
Yeah.
Right?
But the thing, too, with Parekh is he is a really, really smart player. And you watched him this year, and there were times where he would make the wrong play defensively, but it never gave scouts, a red flag level of concern because he's so smart offensively. There's capacity there to learn the defensive game more. He hasn't needed to focus on learning it much lately, and he probably shouldn't have been because, that's the type of guy you want focusing on offense, doing his magic up there. But there's a lot to work with. He's not a dumb player by any means. He works hard offensively. You can probably teach him to dig in a little bit more defensively as well. He's never going to be a Tanev or anything like that. He's never going to be a shutdown guy. But I think you could at least work with him to get his defending at, an NHL average or NHL passable level.
Sure. Or the offensive defenseman passable.
Yes.
Let's go to a guy that has a lot of intrigue for a lot of different reasons than the guy we've mentioned so far, because A, he's a forward, and B, his season was riddled with injuries, and that's Caden Lindstrom, who is huge and has lots of tools and has a lot of the markings of an elite player, but missed a ton of time. Mm-hmm. How do we make sense of all of it?
I mean, you look at what he did in those games, and in the games that he played this year, he was simply incredible. Like, he was so good in the games that he played that you couldn't take your eyes off of him. And it was just in so many different ways. He'd have one shift where he would make something magical happen. He'd dangle a guy and spin off a check and take the puck to the net and score. And then the very next shift, he just completely obliterates a guy along the boards. Someone comes to face him in a scrum and, Lindstrom pushes him around. Like, he's tough. He's skilled. He's fast. He's got an infectious personality. I was lucky enough to interview him this year when the Tigers came through town. Really good young kid. I really like talking to him.
People rave about chatting with him. They really like the human. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just a lot. He's got every kind of tool you'd want. Like, there's really nothing about his game that's not appealing. He scored more this year than he got assists, but I think he's actually a very, very good playmaker, probably a better playmaker than he is a pure finisher. But he's a guy who can do everything. You're talking about a center who's 6'3", who can skate, who brings a physical element. Like, you don't see that every day. And the appeal of that is obvious because, that's the type of guy you can use a lot in the playoffs. It's the type of guy you can use a lot in all situations. There is still some risk there because not only did he miss a lot of time due to injury, he kind of came out of nowhere this year. Like, he had a really good year as a 16-year-old in the dub, but he was a 3rd-round Bantam draft pick, right? This isn't a guy like a Celebrini who's been a star, since he was like 12 or 13, and everyone's kind of, treated him like a star and he's used to the spotlight. He's not. He's a guy who came from small town BC, played for a good program in Bantam. And, he's starting to get there now. He's doing a lot of media interviews and stuff. But there's just a lot of unknown about him. But you look at the upside, you look at the trajectory he's on. the progress he made this year, it's all very appealing. It was really, really crappy for scouts when he got hurt, because everyone was watching this guy all the time. Like when he would come through town, like the place would be full of scouts because they all wanted to see him.
What do you think, Byron? Like, I mean, I think you'd already alluded to the fact that if you're not repeating something, there should be more skepticism.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of a lot of what Derek said, like kind of coming through in the model in a way. Like he had an okay year model wise pre-draft year, but nothing that really jumps off the page. So that's sort of like one flag. And then his equivalency, or where he sort of shows up in the model, is like, it's pretty good, but you look at the guy, like he actually looks very similar to Honzek, is what he looks like in the model. Like they almost look identical in terms of their production and what they look like in this type of model. So then it's like, okay, then you're down to, again, like 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 of these guys turn into stars. So are you getting, Jason Arnott, who looked very similar and was a huge center and worked out great? Or are you getting more something like Logan Brown? Like there's a little concern there. And then now you have, there's the injury stuff, and maybe he was going to creep up to a whole nother level, but then he gets injured. So then that doesn't show up in the model because he never gets there. But like, how serious are these injuries? Is that going to hamper him now? So now his D+1 year is going to be kind of stagnated because he's dealing with, I don't know if the herniated disc sneaks in there or if it's fully recovered, So then is it going to last and last and last? And then you never get that full potential that you're seeing from what Derek's saying about him, like this reputation and all the stuff he can do. Can he put it all together and become that player in the NHL, or is there some things kind of stacking up there that bit of a concern?
He would have been a guy that teams would have been all over at the combine.
100%.
Did you catch any buzz about that, or can you dig on, or is it, people telling you stories to try to get you off the scent time of season?
I didn't hear a lot about him at the combine. As far as I recall, he was there and doing interviews, but wasn't doing the testing due to injury. But
so doesn't help.
But this is a guy that scouts were keeping very close tabs on throughout the season.
Yeah.
They were trying to make a lot of calls to coaches, former coaches, to get to know more about this guy. It's like sharks smelling blood in the water. Like scouts were all over this guy all season. So I don't think they really needed to do much with him at the combine to get an idea about him.
I guess if he's healthy, you can see, or you can learn more with the injuries. But yeah, to your point earlier, all the scouts wanted to see more of this guy.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think is worth mentioning about him, and it kind of ties back to Dickinson playing in London. It's not the same thing with the Tigers, but he's going to be playing with Gavin McKenna the next couple of seasons, who is the next big superstar prospect coming up. That's a good guy to have on your line. That's a good guy to be sitting next to on the bench and picking up pointers from. Like obviously you don't want to, put too much stock into that, but it's something you have to consider. Like he's going to be training and playing with McKenna, picking his brain about things. There's a chance that his development could get a nice little boost from having that kind of influence around him all the time.
Yeah, that's fair. It looks like they'll be playing deep into seasons for the next little while there.
I think especially I got a couple of early views of him early this season. I'd say this. I think a lot of the things that teams that have players like him, I'd say compared to Matthew Tkachuk, in the sense that Matthew Tkachuk can just drive you mad in so many different ways in the ice, because he can outskill you. He can goad you into taking penalties. He can engage physically. This is a guy who's got a bit more physicality in his game, I think, and a bit more of a pest in him.
Bigger frame,
but he's
too.
Also got like the skill to back it up. I think the injuries are always going to be a concern until they're not. But I think if you're an NHL team, if you saw him early in the season when he was just driving teams mad in games and helping his team in so many different ways, I think depending on what you have in your prospect pool, you look at this kid and go, okay, I can bet on this kid because I have this, that, or the other thing in my prospect pool.
See a guy you think could slide to 9 to the Flames? I mean, I guess anyone at this point you could, but
yeah, I can see that.
Is the injury stuff enough, or is there certain teams you're like, you ain't getting past them?
I would be shocked if he went past Montreal.
Yeah. And so maybe now you need a Demidov to be there for him to get past Montreal. And here we are again with the crazy 2 to 13 permutations, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the daily face-off list, because I don't want to just pick one of your lists to look at, not the other. And Stephen Ellis does a great job for our group of the nations for daily face-off. So we'll see who he's got. at the top that we haven't mentioned yet. So I see we've done Celebrini, Demidov, Levshunov, Dickinson, Perrick, Bouillon. Boy, he's got a lot of the D up there at the top, doesn't he? And then Catton comes in at 7. Does it matter if Berkeley Catton's a center or not, guys? Because I feel like that's a question out there.
I mean, I think he can stay at center. It'd be rare. You don't see a lot of guys his size who stay center at the NHL level, but Catton's an exceptional player. Exceptional hockey sense, exceptional skill. Like, this is a guy who put up ridiculous amount of points on a terrible team with no help.
Really?
This is a guy who was playing upwards of 28 or 29 minutes a game as the number one guy, and probably like more or less the only guy the teams would circle on their board before the game is, we got to shut this guy down. And he would still beat them. But he rounded out his game really well this year too. He led the WHL in shorthanded points, which is ridiculous for a 17-year-old who's 5'10" and maybe 170 pounds soaking wet. He's got a lot of Matt Barzal to his game. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but you've got a center who's not that big, but just has a great motor and really drives play with the puck on his stick. You always know he's going to be able to do something. He's always going to have the right idea in his mind. He's not going to turn the puck over very easily, but he's going to be able to transition it. He's going to be able to gain zone entries. He's going to be able to, quarterback a power play. There are some concerns about the physical play. Like, when he gets hit, he gets really hit. He gets knocked off his feet a lot. When he gets pinned to the boards by a bigger defenseman, he's stuck there. You can't really fight through checks the way that some others can. But he's so smart and he's so mobile with his skating that it is really hard to pin him down. So I think with a guy like this, with that level of skill, that level of smarts, I think he's going to be able to stay at the NHL level because he's going to figure out a way to overcome the physical limitations. And I think it'd be really interesting if he's still there for the Flames at 9 because, they have some smaller forwards or average size forwards in the system already. But, if he's still there at 9, there's a very big argument to be made that he's the best player available. And, he could be that star center, that really high-end center that the Flames don't have in their system.
Yeah. The center thing, one scout was telling me, well, maybe he's just like Giroux and it's just creating offense no matter where he is, center or wing. It's a bit of both and depends what else you have. And you just love that you got a guy that can create as well as he can. What thoughts do you have on the season he put together?
Yeah, no, he looks really good. Like, I have him ranked, I think 10th, but I mean, that's basically because of the pieces that are in front of him. I mean, typically a guy like that, like, I would have him ranked certainly in the top 5. He looks like Elias Lindholm, Cole Caulfield, Cole Perfetti, Andrei Svechnikov going back, like Owen Nolan, Damon Lankow. Like, these are the kind of guys that he profiles with.
Yeah, and just to be clear really quickly, those are not stylistic comparisons. These are trajectories. Right?
Yeah, like they look the same in the model. And, there's probably about 50% of these guys turn into stars. Almost all of them make the NHL. So, I mean, at the very least, you have an NHLer there. Whether he plays center or wing, it's tough to get, a top line center probably around kind of the 10th pick is probably where he's going to go. So if he moves to the wing, he's a smaller guy. That probably makes sense. But, I mean, if you can get a star there, whether it's on the wing or center, I mean, center would be better. But, yeah, if you can get a star there, I think that would be huge. So.
Western League kid, Pike.
I mean, we're on a bit of a Western League run, but I mean, he's someone that the Flames have seen a lot of over the last couple seasons. I would, again, the only knock I would have on him, like, the production's nuts. The only knock I'd have on him, and we've been singing this song for years, the Flames have a lot of prospects. Their big prospects aren't particularly skilled. Their skilled prospects aren't particularly big. And the Venn diagram, the overlap there isn't huge. It might just be Sam Honzek at this point. So I don't think they would intentionally shy away from anyone because of a lack of size, but I don't think you ignore the lack of size in their prospect pool.
Yeah. And geez, like that can be a scary predicament to be in because you might be saying goodbye to the star to pick the bigger, safer one. And just because you had some picks of small guys that didn't go the way you wanted doesn't mean you want to miss the next Braden Point or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, next on the board, let's go Cole Eiserman, interesting player that fills the net.
More like goal Eiserman, am I right?
You might be right. Certainly this season, 58 and 57 games. That's incredible. And Derek, the best pure shooter in the class, or is Is there any competition? Is it close? Is he?
No, not really. I mean, Yzerman is the de facto guy. He's the number one best shooter. And, and that's a role that he embraces. Like when you I haven't talked to him, but in interviews, he talks about he wants to be that kind of guy. He wants to focus on his shot.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be an elite goal scorer. And there's no denying that. I mean, he certainly proved it this year against NCAA competition, against USHL competition, at the U18s, at various other international tournaments. All the guy does is score goals. Where it becomes tricky with him and why he's not ranked higher on a lot of boards is that there's not a lot else to his game right now. And that was a concern coming into the season. There was talk about him being the second or third best player at the start of the scouting season. And all he did all year was kind of drop and drop.
Despite scoring a ton of goals.
Yeah, despite scoring a ton of goals, because he doesn't really bring a lot else. If you were to give his shot like a skill rating, it'd be a 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else about his game is maybe a 6 or a 7 at best. And that creates some concerns, right? He's a guy that, on the power play, if you can feed him the puck, he's going to bury one-timers all day. That's great. But he's not going to be a guy who drives a lot of play offensively at even strength. He's not going to be a guy who probably drives a line by himself, which is concerning. If you're a team that already has a star center prospect in your system, sure, draft Yzerman. You've got a guy who can ride shotgun to your star center. It's perfect. But if you're a team maybe like the Flames, where you don't necessarily have a guy that he could play with, that he would need to play with, then it becomes a little bit harder to say, like, is he going to be good enough as the guy to make it worth drafting him that high? He did make progress throughout the season, got a little bit more well-rounded, got better at hanging on to pucks, got better defensively, but nothing about his game really reached that upper echelon, which is kind of concerning. And with the U.S. national team development program, we've seen guys come through that system who looked kind of similar that didn't pan out. So you got Kiefer Bellows and Oliver Wahlstrom, two guys who, big shooting wingers, got drafted in the middle of the first round. Neither of them have really worked out the way that, it was a hope that they would. So you don't want to compare him too strongly to those guys, but you worry, is there a trend there? Is that something we need to worry about here with Yzerman? I don't think he'll slide for too long because teams always need goal scoring. It's such a premium in the NHL.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere in the 8 to 15 range he's going to go. But I think there's some variability as to how much teams like him and how much risk they're willing to accept.
Do you see some Phil Kessel vibes here, Byron? Like finisher, but if he's your best player, you're probably not winning.
Yeah, just kind of sitting on the side waiting to get that shot off. But I mean, when like him in the model, like he profiles like very, very well. Like, he looks like Matthew Tkachuk, Steven Stamkos, who is a pure shooter. Vinny LeCavalier, Clayton Keller, like
that's great company.
Lots of great hits. Pierre-Marc Bouchard is probably like the worst out of the batch. So it's like, okay, what are you getting here? And then the other thing with him that isn't often mentioned is how young he is. Like he's like, I don't know, 18 days away from being in the next year's draft. So I mean, most of the guys that he's being compared to are like born in like January, February, like November, October, the previous year. Like he is so much younger than them that, maybe, hopefully there's like a late blooming aspect there that he can kind of figure out, 2 or 3 more of these different parts of the game while still having that shot. And, as somebody who falls to like something in like the, 10 to 15 range, like that could be massive value for a team. Like just curious for like a player like Cole Caulfield, like was he similar in his draft or could he do more of that outside of the shooting stuff in his draft year?
He had a skating advantage for sure. The shot was obviously the big draw with Caulfield, but he was also a pretty good playmaker. He didn't have to do it very often, but he could do it at a high level when he needed to. And he was pretty mobile, and he liked to play with a lot of pace. He wasn't the fastest skater out there, but he always kept up a high pace, and he could play with the play like that. With Yzerman, it's not quite always there. He's not always moving his feet as much. So, he's sometimes he's a guy who's, like you were saying, like maybe waiting on the outside for the puck to come to him. So it's a little bit of a concern there. But there's certainly some similarities to Caulfield. That would be for any team that's drafting Yzerman, you're hoping you can get someone like Caulfield.
Game breaker that can score. Find room for him.
Yeah.
Costa Hellenius, tell us about the Finnish centerman, because I feel like it's not going to be the same conversation we just had.
Yeah, no, it's almost like exact opposite. Great motor, great work ethic. Maybe not the most skilled guy, but he puts up a lot of points because he's really, really smart. He's around the puck a lot. I don't think you could find a single scout who's seen him who doesn't like him. He's just kind of this universal like for what he's able to do. I mean, he was playing in the Liga for the last 2 years as a 16-year-old, then as a 17-year-old.
Wow.
And he was really good this year as a 17-year-old. You know,
those points totals don't jump off the screen at most of our viewers, but the context of them happening in Liga is important.
Yeah.
Like Byron, your model especially, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, each league has its own translation of how that relates to a point in the NHL. So obviously, you know, the CHL is different from college, and these are different from all these different Euro leagues in Europe. So I mean, you know, the KHL is probably the second best league in the world. It's not the AHL, you know, and then the SHL is probably the third best, and then behind that is basically, you know, the AHL and the league are pretty tied. So yeah, I mean, those points don't jump off the page, but then when you break it into a model, like, he looks really good. Like,
yeah, he's 17, he's playing against grown men putting dinner on the table.
He's young too. I think he's born in May. Like, he's got this profile where I really like him in the model too. And it's one of these things where, you know, you talk to scouts, you hear what they say, and it's not a whole lot of negative. Like, maybe he doesn't have this like huge dynamic part to his game, but like everything is like very safe and they like everything about him. And then you look at him in the model, and like very few people look like that, like coming from a Euro league like this and being this young and producing like this and having, you know, the pre-draft year that's really good that he, you know, backs it up. And, you know, he looks like William Nylander and Lehkonen are basically the only two examples. So if he fits as something in the middle of that, like, that's a win of a first round pick for sure. So I really like him. And you can't see a lot of negative about him. So it's almost like weird that he's ranked so low. I don't know if it's because he's a 5'10" center that they're a little weary of that, but like, he looks really good.
And so in your list, I've got you having him six, which is really high, but also you guys at McKean's are high on him as well, if I'm correct. No, I also had the other part.
I think he finished around 11 or 12.
Okay, so almost top 10.
Yeah. And then he's a guy that was a lot higher throughout the season.
Okay.
We started him, I think, around top 5. When we updated our list in October or November, I think he was still in the top 10.
Okay.
It's not so much that he did anything wrong. It's that other guys kind of came out of nowhere and passed him. So Salayev, we'll talk about, I think, the next big name in a little bit here. I'm not going to say it yet. But there were a few guys that just came and, you know, showed a little bit more long-term upside. Maybe guys who project a little bit better as first-line forwards or top 4 defensemen. I mean, look at the guys we're talking about so far. Like, Parekh is really interesting. Bouillon, Caden Lindstrom is, you know, kind of a physical unicorn for a forward. So there's nothing really that Hellenius did wrong. It's just there aren't a lot of elements to his game that really grade out as high-end. Good skater, good playmaker, good offensive sense, but nothing that's maybe elite, you would say. So he's a guy who projects really, really well as an NHLer. Like, I will be shocked if he doesn't play, you know, 500 plus games in the NHL. I'll be shocked if he doesn't become a second line forward, but I might be a little surprised if he becomes a first line forward and a guy who really can carry a line himself.
If you've tuned in waiting to chat about a certain player, we're only going to tease you for one more name, fellas. So before we get to a particular forward, let's talk about that wild card 6th defenseman in Carter Yakimchuk. I don't know that he belongs in the top 5 in terms of when you're consolidated rankings, but he certainly is a guy that could be one of the top 5 defensemen taken, as weird as that sounds. Derek, can you walk us through the nuance of what Carter Yakimchuk is and has been for the Calgary Hitmen?
He is the epitome of cowboy hockey. He's so entertaining to watch because you've got this 6'3" strong physical defenseman who can also handle the puck like a first line forward. You know, he's got so much puck skill. He's got a booming shot from the point, and he's just got this ridiculous persona to him. Like, the Calgary Hitmen weren't particularly great the last couple of years, especially this year. And there were so many times where it seemed like their whole strategy would boil down to give Yakimchuk the puck and let him do something magical with it. And he would dangle through 2 guys and, you know, bury a shot top corner. And this is something that happened over and over and over again throughout the year. He played ridiculous minutes for that team, and he was always making something happen, you know, always dragging them into the fight, always creating offensive chances. But he's a guy that also projects really well as a defensive defenseman at the NHL level because he's got the size and the reach. He's got some real nasty to him. He likes to drop the gloves. He likes to land the big hits. He's not scared of getting his hands dirty. So when you look at all these different elements, it's understandable why teams are very interested in him and why he's showing up on some draft boards really, really high, because you've got a right shot defenseman with size who can play both ends of the ice. And with the Hitman, he's a number one defenseman. So is he going to be a number one defenseman in the NHL level? I don't necessarily think so. I have concerns about his skill and his skating that make me think he might not get to that level, but he's been able to do that kind of work so far. And that's something that teams like. We've seen him be able to do that job at the WHL level. Maybe he becomes our number one defenseman at the AHL level for a year, and then we kind of groom him to that point in the future. So there's a lot of good tools there. But he's also just a big wild card, because the way he played this year was really green light. He would always have the green light to drive play and take chances and try to make something happen. But that's not really how NHL hockey is played. It's a lot more structured, a lot more systems based. And we haven't really seen Yakinchuk play that kind of way. So his game is going to need a lot of adaptation to work well at the professional level. And it's hard to say exactly how that's going to look. But man, if there's a team that really wants to take a big swing in the top 10 and they think that, they can work with him to maximize his strengths and kind of clean up some of his weaknesses, there could be a number one or a number two defenseman there at the NHL level, just, with the right amount of development and time and patience.
Like model wise, like older guy, a lot of what Derek's saying kind of comes through. Like last year, he doesn't have really the numbers to back up, top 10 selection, but then the numbers this year, very good, but maybe that's because of this cowboy hockey he's talking about. So, guys in the model that kind of look like him, Morgan Riley, even Ivan Provorov, Cam York. So
mixed bag there.
Yeah, mixed bag. You're probably certainly getting an NHL defenseman, probably like a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 chance you're kind of getting that offensive star. So yeah, I have him ranked, kind of just like 11th or 12th type thing. Yeah, but in most drafts, like I would probably have him, around 5 or 6. But like, again, this draft is just so deep and there's so many D options up there that look a little bit better. But yeah, it looks pretty decent and not too bad. So
you would have seen him a bunch, Ryan.
I like him. I don't love him. I like him because he's big. He can do a lot of things. I think that I think Derek alluded to this. I think the challenge with him is he's been playing in such a talent shallow environment with the Hitman that at his worst, he tries to do too much. He tries to be Mr. Everything, and he tries to grab hold of the game in times where maybe you should let it come to him. And I think if you're a team, that's both a risk and an opportunity, because if he goes into an NHL environment or a pro environment, he might just be able to calm it down a little bit, and he won't need to be Mr. Everything, because when he lets the game come to him, there's a reason why he scored 30 goals. There's a reason why he has the numbers he is, because he has the talent to back it up. It's just a matter of figuring out the best way to utilize it.
It's an interesting player. And that ends just kidding. All right. The name you've all arrived here for, Tij Iginla had an absolutely monster year, friends. And if he started out with a guy that maybe had a chance to go in the first round and then became I think he might be in the top half of the first round, it's kind of starting to feel like he might not get to the Flames at 9 in the first round. Not to suggest that he won't, but that there are enough people high on this incredible trajectory that what might have been like, don't reach for the kid's son, you might not have the chance to do the Calgary Flames. What do you make of Tij Iginla's season, Byron?
Yeah, I really like him. He's super, super young, just like his dad. Like he's born August 1st. Jerome's obviously born
one of the youngest,
famous July 1st. So one of the youngest players in the draft, which I always love. He's got the size. He's got the production in his draft year that, these younger guys that pop in their draft year. I mean, his D-1 year, I mean, he improved by about 300% from that. And when you see players do that, like it's kind of a different story, comparing him to a guy like Lindstrom, who is like 6 months younger. Like that's a whole different ball game. Like he's popping in his draft year after not doing too much in his pre-draft year, but he's so young that those players tend to hit as stars much more. They're hitting as stars about 40% of the time versus, a guy like Lindstrom who would hit like 1 in 5, 1 in 6 type thing. So he's on this massive trajectory. If he goes back to the WHL, like he probably will next year, and goes up a whole nother level, that sets him on a whole nother stage, that's kind of, that's what Jonathan Huber did when he went back. That's what, Musty is doing this year. So that's what's sort of the expectation of him. And that's where you think he's going to get next year. So yeah, I mean, he looks kind of okay. I mean, well above average in the model right now, but it's projecting where he's going to go with that runway he has in front of him because he's so young. And yeah, I really like him. And I think he's going to evolve into something really special.
You guys at McKean's, where does he finish off? How do you like him?
I think he finished 6th on our final list, 6 or 7.
That's quite high. So you can speak to the meteoric rise.
Yeah, it was incredible what he was able to accomplish this season. And there was a lot of mystery about him coming into the year. So last year he played for the Seattle Thunderbirds, who won the WHL title. Deep team at forward and defense. Iginla didn't play a lot. So, you recognize the pedigree, but you didn't really know too much about what you were going to get. He didn't play a ton of games, and when he did play, he didn't get a ton of minutes.
Yeah.
Gets traded to Kelowna this year, starts the season on an okay team on the second line, and he just takes off pretty much right away and just starts becoming a dominant force at the WHL level. And all throughout the year, he just got better and better and better, even though he never really had much of a supporting cast. He became such a central figure on Kelowna, where it seemed like every shift he'd get out there, he would make something really incredible happen. And even come playoff time, he was even better. Yeah. Like, he was the best player in the first round of the WHL playoffs. He was fantastic. There's this certain like aura about him that I wish I had better, more tangible way to describe, but just the way he carries himself, the confidence. He's got that dog in him, as people like to say now. But there's something to that, right? Like, the brighter the spotlight gets on him, the better he plays. He doesn't
8 goals in the first round, right?
Yeah, he doesn't, shy away from pressure. At the U18 tournament in the gold medal game, he was phenomenal. He was a huge reason why Canada came back and won that game. It's just the way he carries himself, shift over shift. He's dangerous. He thinks the game really, really well. The shot is really impressive. Very good hands. I think he's a better playmaker than a lot of people realize, because he didn't have a lot of players to finish the plays he was making this year. There's just a lot to like there. He could be a center next year. There's talk about that. He started this year playing a bit of center, then got shifted to the wing. But Kelowna is going to be really thin down the middle next year. If I was their coach, I would want him playing down the middle, because I think that's where he'd leave the most impact.
I had it start. He's been listed as a center almost everywhere, and he took very few faceoffs for anyone to be considered a center. He's also 17, and you're starting to speak to why that might be the case. So you're trying to figure out, okay, where do these faceoffs come from? Is he on the penalty kill with another winger? Did his centerman get tossed out? Because the totals are very small for someone that's listed as a center everywhere. But you think that it's definitely not too late for him to become a centerman?
No, I don't think so. Earlier in his career, he played more center. And at the start of this year, I think it was his first 3 games, he was playing like actually center, taking lots of faceoffs.
Okay.
And just when I watched those games, he didn't look out of place. And just the way he plays, the tools he has, I think he could make it work. Yeah. Maybe he's not as natural as a center as someone like Berkeley Catton, who we talked about earlier. But I think he could make it work down the middle. And I think Kelowna would be wise to try him down there. Yeah. But even if he's a winger at the NHL level, I mean, you've got a guy who could be a 40, 50 goal scorer, a guy who probably wears a letter on his jersey. Like, there's a lot of leadership there. And obviously, he's the son of Jerome. He's not exactly like his dad, but there are a lot of similarities, right? Just the way he kind of carries himself. There's, Jerome had this presence too, right? Born leader. Everyone kind of gravitated towards him. And you can tell that Tij has, absorbed a lot of that from his dad.
Where's a letter? Maybe he's a winger that scores 40 or 50. There's a lot to unpack here, Ryan. If this guy's last name was Smith, I think you just that's a great prospect. He's one of the guys that's probably going to go in the top 10. But there are so many layers here. And it's not all just, hey, if they draft him, you'll sell more jerseys. There's also there's all different facets here. It's not just, draft him because his dad played here.
When the season began, there was a lot of questions like, what the heck is this kid? Because granted, I mean, he was a depth player on a absolutely stacked Thunderbirds team a couple years ago. And he seems to have been a sponge because, when he played, he wasn't really if he was a center in Seattle, it was because all their centers were hurt or sick or somewhere else. And so by the time the season became high leverage, he was mostly a spare part or a spectator. He played 3 playoff games.
Yeah.
But he seems like he's taken what he needed to from that situation. And if he had come into this year based on his age and his lack of reps a year ago and just been good or been decent, people would go, yeah, he'll figure it out. He figured it out. He figured it out extremely quickly, to the point where I think the big challenge for a lot of scouts I talk to is they don't know what his ceiling is. They know he's going to be good. They just don't know how good, because it's basically like his first Western League season didn't happen because of how odd his usage was. But I don't know. I will say this: people in Western Canada have been conditioned not to bet against people with Iginla as their last name. I mean, his older sister has turned into a really good college player. Joe projects really well for the 2026 draft and looked pretty good, dipping his toe in the Western League this year in limited usage.
Had some multi-point games,
and,
I think, right?
And Tij has gotten better and better as the year went on. I wouldn't bet it. If you're quote unquote settling for Tij Iginla, if he's 9th on your list and the 8 guys ahead of him are gone, you go, okay. And you don't really think twice about it.
Well, I think it's easy if he's the best player on your list, because why wouldn't you take the guy that's best on your list? Unless you're really worried about some, like, all the reasons you wouldn't have hired Jarome Iginla. Right?
What's he ever done?
So, well, no, but just there is that thing where there aren't many rational parents about their children, even when you get into front offices of NHL organizations and people that work closely around teams. It looks like a disease more than like isolated incidents, that you can't find people that can survive it. And oddly, if Jarome's the AGM and his kid's in the AA and he thinks he should be in the NHL, what happens? I mean, it's a situation where if the kid's last name is Smith, you go into the office, you talk about it, and it's not a big deal, but it changes. And the fans' expectations also change. And maybe contract negotiations become a little bit different. Now, all these things are not an issue if he's going to be a star. So, but it's just, I don't think people think of that. Everyone thinks of the name bars, right? Which is great. And yeah, if he's a stud player and he's the best on your list, of course you have to take him. The question is, what if you have him a box with some other guys? Are you only thinking about the positives? I find it a fascinating decision to make, Byron.
Yeah, I've kind of been on the fence with this one as well. Like, there's all the nepotism there that could happen, which is a concern. But then the big concern is, like, you think he's going to be a star, but then you don't draft him because of all of that. And then he goes to the next team, one of the next 2 teams after you, and then he becomes a gigantic superstar over there, and you didn't draft him, and you're just going to get eaten alive, and now you don't have that Iginla on your team, so it's
true. Yeah, it goes
in the I don't know what the right decision is. Like, there's so much to it.
You do have to approach just like his last name Smith. I think is probably how you have to do it.
But even if his last name was Smith, like, this is a guy pushing top 10 for sure.
Oh, yeah. No one's suggesting he's out of whack if he goes at 9. Yeah. Like, this is not. I'm not worried about the nepotism pick. I just wonder how they weigh these variables that don't exist if it's not Jerome's kid.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have the same woulda, coulda, shoulda luck regardless of who they take. I mean, this is the kind of first round, like the guys have been saying, that probably after like 2 or 3. You could pick names out of a hat from the next 10 guys, and A, it wouldn't be shocking, and B, there wouldn't be a lot of argument over the quality of the players. And I think then we'll figure out, it'll all come out in the wash. But I mean, this is the organization that infamously traded up to not take Marty Brodeur.
Yeah, so they could get you.
They have some ghosts, and hopefully they don't get too in their own heads, because I think I did a video. Or my conclusion is basically just, you got to trust your guys. If the consensus in the room from your area scouts, your crossover scouts, everyone whose last name is not Iginla says this is the guy, he's probably the guy.
Yeah, you hope and for fans, they want to see it happen. I get it. It's the greatest player in franchise history. Of course, you want to see his kid become a star, wear the same jersey. Would you like to see it happen anywhere else? No, God, no. That's Iginlas are ours. You want to place we want the copyright on all the Iginlas. We need them all. So what you hope is that he's there at 9 and that he's an absolute stud. It'd be incredibly exciting. And for a franchise that's had a dark 14 months, maybe longer, depending how you viewed it it would be quite something. 14 months is not nearly enough. Probably 20 months.
Since that puck went in Game 5.
Well, and you know what? That really wasn't even it, in the sense that you can lose a series and things are fine, but it's what happened after that when July 1 rolls around and then Matthew Tkachuk thing happens, and then you see a bet that could have worked not work, but was doubled down on. It hurt even more when you had the contract extension with Huberdeau, and it would be an incredibly amazing story if it goes well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know why I have to sell that. I think we all know that. Incredible. Okay.
But it's not a first overall pick either. Like it's 9th. So if he's going to play in the NHL. I mean, I think that's pretty, like, he's going to get there. So even if he's like an okay middle 6 guy, it's like, well, it's 9th. But then if he's a star, then it's like, we got the Iginla.
I'm gonna double down on the Daryl Sutter principle of, if you draft your kid, if something goes wrong, you're the one who has to trade him.
Okay. Didn't see you going there, but all right. Let's play one more little game before we wrap up the program. Do want to say thank you to our 3 sponsors, Village Honda, as well as McLeod Law and Betway. We'll take a look at some fun little props before the end of the show. But first, and we've kept you a couple of hours here, so we thank you for your patience, all of you, including the viewers. But give me a guy you'd love to see the Flames take at 28. Whether you think he'd be there, you hope he could slide there, or like, man, this kid's got such a crazy ceiling, or something about him that fits the organization. You'd just love to see the fit with Calgary at 28, assuming that they're picking with Vancouver's pick there.
I'll go first. Alphonse Frege. He's Swedish. He's offensive. There's a lot of dynamism to his game, and he feels like a Calgary Flames pick. And they've had a lot of experience with Sweden, with players of that profile. They obviously need all-around defensemen, and he seems like a guy that they could build that way. And he's someone who's probably available at 28.
Derek, do you have a particular guy you'd love to see slide to 28?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Harrison Brunick of the Kamloops Blazers. So you've got a defenseman who's about 6'3", right shot, and skates really well, who's on a really nice trajectory. He was a late riser for us all season. Last year, he played on the Blazers team that hosted the Memorial Cup and played with a lot of good players. Logan Stankoven was there, Olin Zellweger, Fraser Minton. So he was absorbing a lot of good lessons and a lot of good tips from all these guys. And this year, on the rebuilding Blazers, emerged as their number 1 defenseman. And his game really started to take off in lots of different directions. He started rushing the puck more, started getting more time on the power play. His offense started to come along. Then he got hurt. Then he missed a lot of time. He came back for the U18s, was used in more of like a depth shutdown defenseman role, killing a lot of penalties. And he looked pretty good there too. So there's a lot of material here to work with. The Blazers are probably going to be bad next year and the year after. But Brunick, he's going to be the number 1 defenseman. Going to be playing a lot of minutes, probably top power play, probably top penalty kill. His game's going to grow a lot through all those reps. Best case scenario with him, this is a guy who could eventually emerge as a number 1 or number 2 defenseman at the NHL level. That's long term. That's a lot would have to go right from there. But that is what the ceiling we see with him right now. And I think if you're the Flames, and we talked about this earlier, there's not a lot of high-end talent. There's a lot of guys who are going to play NHL games, but might not be true drivers of play. They might not be real stars. I think he's a guy who has the potential to get there. It would take, a little bit of luck, a lot of development, and there's a bit of risk to that idea. But I think that's the type of player that the Flames should target, because you're going to get someone really good at 9, as we talked about. Even if you don't get maybe your first guy, there's going to be, let's say, 10 options that are going to be really, really good for them. But with the other pick, I think you want to take a bit of a swing and hope you can land 2 star players in the same draft.
I love the idea of chasing some ceiling here, especially just given everything we talked about, the lack of the stars in the system, the actual decent quantity of players in their system rather than quality, and maybe some concerns over some guys in the system that maybe have lost a bit of that ceiling. Is there someone that the model loves at 28 or that you'd love to see them personally go get?
Yeah, there's a couple of guys, but I think I would go probably with Cole Hudson.
And he's real high in the list.
Yeah. So I have him, I think, about 11th.
Yep.
And he profiles really good numbers in his pre-draft year and in his draft year coming from the U.S. development program. Profiles Ryan Ellis is a good comp, similar size too. He actually looks better than Lane did in his draft year. And Lane's, kind of evolving into this great piece for Montreal. So can Cole be close to that? Possibly. And he's also younger relative to Cole. I think Cole's born in February, and then Lane is born on draft day. So that would be a big coup. At 28, he's born on the 28th, and it's the 28th. So it just fits.
Just a lot going on there. Is there any chance that this Czech defenseman is going to slide to 28, or is that getting a little too greedy for me here?
It's possible. He's really the big mystery box
because he's missed a lot of time to injury.
Yeah, but coming into the season, there was a lot of talk of him as a top 5 or top 10 pick, right? That's kind of where he was on those early season boards. And he wasn't great before he got hurt. He was playing in the Czech Pro League, and he just wasn't – he didn't look as good as he did previously, especially at the Hlinka tournament. So there was hope. He's playing through some things. He's going to turn his game around. Then he blows out his knee at the World Juniors, and then now no one really knows. So the best case scenario for him is still the guy that was, considered very high coming into the season. Maybe that player's still there to a degree. So I think a team is going to see the possibility that he becomes a top 4 right shot defenseman with size and picks him maybe late teens or early 20s. But also I wouldn't be surprised if he did slide, because there are a lot of players who've really emerged this year, guys like Teddy Stiga, Marek Van Acker, like guys who've kind of played their way into the first round that maybe teams, because they know these players more, because they've got more of a book on them, maybe they feel a little bit more comfortable drafting someone like that. And that forces Jiricek down, maybe all the way to the 28 range.
Interesting. Where do you have him on consolidated? I know you've been doing a great job of consolidated.
Around 20. Derek, nice. I'll steal Derek's thunder a bit, because a guy right behind him on the consolidated list that has a lot more momentum, Stian Stolberg. And that, I think those are the two players that, even though they're sort of in the same area, I could probably see Stolberg going earlier, because there's the perception that he's on the rise. He has momentum. He's got some momentum behind him, whereas Jiricek is sort of just doesn't really have the momentum.
Interesting. Okay, we've got some Betway to look at here. This is always fun, fellas. And I think, Byron, was it you or our other pal last year, Cam Robbins? I think you were like, there were some interesting little things there. Let's take a peek at where some guys are projected to go. First off, on Betway, who is projected to go number 2 overall. Now, these odds do change as, money comes in or people hear things as you get closer to the draft. They really think it's Lev Shunov, the Belarusian defenseman from Michigan State, going 2, not Demidov to Chicago, and not any of the other guys we've talked about at length today. Interesting. There are the Russian things about Demidov, right? If he played at Michigan State, maybe this isn't the case. There's lots of options there for a fun one at number 2. And then they've got a huge list of over-unders with guys' names and their draft position. For example, Caden Lindstrom, the Medicine Hat Tigers centerman we talked about, is it over or under 4.5? So do you think he's in the top 4? Do you think he's 5 and beyond? All right. So if you like any of those, you can head over to Betway to check them out. And just talking about last year, they do rotate some of the names through. Just because these are here now, they might not be later, and there might be some other stuff. Does anything jump off at you as, I don't know that I agree with that, or like, yeah, that seems like a pretty good barometer?
I mean, the Seneca one is really, really interesting. He's probably the latest and last riser on draft boards. Had a really good showing in the OHL playoffs. Was honestly one of the best players in the OHL playoffs as a 17-year-old draft eligible player. And there's a lot of projectability with him. You got a 6'3" winger with really good puck skills, good skating ability. And you can tell he's still just growing into his body. He's maybe 180 pounds. He's still pretty skinny. So when you kind of look at what would happen with him once he physically develops, you could have a guy who can play that heavier game, but still has really, really good hands and playmaking, like among the best in the draft class. There has been talk about him sneaking into the top 10.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the Montreal Canadiens possibly considering him at 5. Who knows if that's just media spin? Who knows if there's something to that? But
that's the number that looked off to me. And off, not like I don't believe it, but just like that's one where there's a lot of helium the second half of the year. And it's like, wow, there's got to be some teams considering it for that number to be, 11.5, not 13.5 or 14.5. Interesting.
Yeah.
Byron, anything there or just same old?
The Lindstrom one, not that it was surprising, but like top 5, like after like the injury news came out, and I'm curious if he sticks in there or if like that scares some teams off and then he drops out a little bit. And then, I guess
I'm thinking a team needs 2
because Montreal is at 5, so I guess he's not going to make it past them. So
but it's 4.5 the over under, so that would be the over.
So it's got to be
that's
over.
because I agree. I see a tough time him getting past Montreal, but
yeah,
that's still
but being in that like top 4 is like, whoa, that's
Anaheim at 3. They took Leo Carlson recently. Columbus at 4. They took Adam Fantilli. So they might not be teams that need centers.
I totally agree.
Interesting.
Kent Johnson in Columbus.
Yeah.
Fellas, this has been a ton of fun. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want you to plug the great work that you do. Byron, first over at hockeyprospecting.com. What's going on?
Yeah, so hockeyprospecting.com. Like I said, it's all these models that I've been talking about on the show. So the model goes back all the way to 1990, and there's over 7,000 players in the model, and you can go through and compare various players from different drafts or this draft, and kind of compare them all the way through. And then there's also rankings of team prospect pools, and also the hockey prospecting top 32, which is not at all how the top 32 is actually going to go. It's more based on the model. So that's out there now. So yeah, you can sign up. It's a like annual subscription fee, or you can just follow me on Twitter for any little tidbits about the model, and I'll obviously be tweeting during the draft and being all over that. So
I can't wait for the draft. Always love looking at your stuff. It's pretty unique, and I think has significant value based on that it's using different stuff than maybe a lot of the other resources have. It's unique that way. Derek, what's going on at McKean's?
Yeah, I'm not going to plug myself. I'm going to plug my comrades at McKean's. Okay. We do draft stuff all year round. You can subscribe to our website, but our big, bread and butter is the draft guide every year, which is out now.
Yep.
We got profiles on 300 ranked prospects, plus a few other feature articles there. So yeah, we went really deep this year. You can get the draft guide for $20, which is pretty sweet.
Yep.
And it's based on the input of our whole team of scouts. We've got guys throughout North America. We've got scouts in different parts of Europe. And we all worked really hard this year. We had guys in rinks, putting in the long hours and drinking the bad coffee to, help get the analysis and the insight that we needed to put this whole guide together. And I think we did a fantastic job. I'm really proud of our final list. I'm really proud of the depth we went on a lot of our profiles. So I think it's a great resource because, your team's probably going to draft guys in the 5th, 6th, 7th round that you've never heard of before. So our guide, we probably going to have profiles on them. So you can get a early feel for what these players are and how they play. And, that's value to a lot of fans.
Ryan, what's going on Flames Nation? A lot of draft coverage coming up, I hope, after all this.
Change for Radiator putting out draft content. And I think the plan is I'll be in Vegas. Don't know where I'm sitting yet, but in Vegas at whatever building they're doing this thing at, like last year.
I forget what it's called, but it's shaped like a sphere. That's
something like that. It's like the dome, circle dome or something. I forget. They come up with weird names and stuff.
3D circle.
Yeah, it's the last traditional centralized draft before they go to the boring NFL model. So it's the last hurrah. And it is kind of fun that they're doing the last traditional draft in Vegas. It'll
boring unless you're the commissioner. You can do all those handshakes. Yeah, you're right. It's going to be a little less fun after this year. We're glad you're there covering it for us on Flames Nation.
It's gonna be a fun weekend,
and we'll find a way to get them on some broadcasts. We'll be down there as well. It looks like we will be broadcasting poolside Wednesday through Friday, and we may have a little wrinkle up our sleeve for draft night as well at the Sphere in Vegas. Fellas, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it. Also, big shout outs to RJ putting together the incredible graphics package, and Jack for helping us put this together as well. Do check out the content and the incredible work over at hockeyprospecting.com, as well as McKean's Hockey, Flames Nation, and of course, our pals at Daily Faceoff as well. We showed a bunch of the Stephen Ellis draft rankings as well. Have fun on the 28th. To Iginla or not to Iginla? That is the question.